Chapter 30-99. The current Soul Saint clan did not even have ancestral techniques. Where did this person learn them from? But that was not important. Fortunately, your level is still low, and your soul is not strong enough. Otherwise, you would have been in danger. The blue heart puppet waved its arm, and a wave of blue light swept across, dispersing all the fog in front of it. Not far away, Suyu's retreating figure appeared. The blue heart puppet grinned. "Kid, I have come to this world and need people. If you give me your heart and follow me from now on, you will receive many benefits in the future." After a pause, it said faintly, "I might even give you the opportunity to become a strong fighter of the 10,000 saints." The former was fine, as it was all empty talk. Who knew what the so-called benefits were? But the opportunity to become a strong fighter of the 10,000 saints was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It was not something that could be obtained just by luck. Who wouldn't be tempted? Especially the strong fighters of the great saints present. Forget it. I am free to do whatever I want, and I am not used to being restrained by others, Suyu said lightly. The blue heart puppet's smile faded. Then you should just die. Before the last word left its mouth, its figure had already blurred. In the distance, Suyu's expression changed, and he was about to dodge. But an icy voice came from behind him. "Why do you think I'm talking nonsense with an ant?" Of course, it was to divert Suyu's attention and give him a fatal blow. It could not be bothered to take in a creature with such a low cultivation level as Suyu's as a follower. Even if it wanted to, it should be at the peak of the great saint level. Suyu's pupils shrank, and his body stiffened. Before he could react, he felt a chill in his chest. An iron claw had pierced through Suyu's chest. In an instant, fresh blood sprayed out, splattering all over the ground. The blue heart puppet clenched its fist, instantly shattering Suyu's body. At the same time, it grabbed an aquamarine round pearl. That was the only space-type item on Suyu's body. The blue heart iron heart could only be hidden in it. Finally! The blue heart puppet laughed hoarsely, instantly activating the aquamarine round pearl. Unexpectedly, the moment it was opened, the dark green bead suddenly turned golden and exploded at the same time. At the same time, Suyu's remains, which had collapsed into flesh and blood, turned into fluorescent light and disappeared from the world. The blue heart puppet's pupils constricted. It immediately realized that it had been tricked. What he had killed was not the real Suyu, but the illusory soul technique. In the blink of an eye, the blue heart puppet had tossed away the golden bead the instant it exploded. However, in the instant he threw it away, a mighty freeze resounded between heaven and earth. The powerful energy of time flowed over like a flood and swept through the surroundings, causing everything to be frozen in place. Even the blue heart puppet was no exception. Its body froze for an instant. Although it was short, it was enough. Bang! There was an intense explosion, and the blue heart puppet was instantly engulfed in fiery light. Large cracks appeared on its skeleton. The golden bead was none other than a powerful self-destructing weapon that he had snatched from Little Skeleton. Its might was comparable to that of a peak great sage. Although the blue heart puppet's body was tyrannical and invincible, its consciousness was weak. Such a powerful explosion was unable to destroy its body, but it could injure its soul. As expected, the blue heart puppet let out a miserable groan and staggered backwards. Just as it was retreating, a gust of cold wind appeared without warning, piercing its empty back. The puppet's ancestor had said that one of its two weaknesses was its back. If it could injure the inside, it might be able to inflict real damage on the blue heart puppet. "What makes you think that I don't know that you were just stalling for time?" Suyu said indifferently as he appeared. Although he had only been cultivating for 200 years, he had experienced countless life and death battles in his life. He had seen insignificant tricks like this countless times. Trying to deceive him was merely giving him a chance to beat him at his own game. Clang! However, unexpectedly, just as the absolute heaven sword was about to stab into the hole in its back, the blue heart puppet suddenly had an idea. Contrary to its usual behavior, it used its right fist to stab into the hole in its chest, using its fist as the heart to protect the whole. The absolute heaven sword pierced the other party's fist, causing violent sparks to fly. At the same time, the powerful recoil shook Su Yu's arm so much that the absolute heaven sword almost flew out of his hand. The blue heart puppet slowly turned its head, its eyes filled with murderous intent. You deserve to die. Boom! The fist in its heart suddenly shot out a solid beam of blue light, piercing through Su Yu at close range. At such a close distance and so sudden, anyone else would have died without a doubt. Su Yu had plotted many times, but in the end, he had still been defeated by the absolute disparity in strength. Puff! The blue beam of light instantly pierced through Su Yu, turning his body into a blue crystal. Finally, it fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. Let's see if he can still die. The blue heart puppet coldly snorted, grabbing the absolute heaven sword with a greedy look in its eyes. This time, it should be Su Yu's true body that was killed. After all, the body could be deceived with illusions, but this sword, which was filled with a vast murderous aura, could not be created with illusions. However, just as the blue heart puppet grasped the absolute heaven sword, a blood-red line on the sword hilt suddenly compressed. That was because the resentful spirits had temporarily given up on suppressing the absolute heaven sword. The absolute heaven sword's own consciousness suddenly erupted, and it uncontrollably attacked the blue heart puppet. The sudden scene caught the blue heart puppet off guard. It had no choice but to grip the absolute heaven sword tightly to avoid harming itself. However, right at that moment, a scene that the blue heart puppet had not expected occurred. Su Yu, who should have been dead, appeared out of thin air on the right side of its body. Then, with the great scythe of 10,000 calamity, he slashed at the puppet's right armpit from below with lightning speed. This attack was so sudden that even the onlookers did not expect it. The blue heart puppet, who was concentrating on suppressing the absolute heaven sword, was even more surprised. What? The blue heart puppet's heart shook violently. Could it be that what it had just killed was Su Yu's illusions? How is that possible? Could it be that, from the start of the fight until now, all of its attacks had been predicted by the other party? Was that some kind of secret technique that could predict the future? No, it was not a secret technique. If it was a secret technique that could predict the future, there would definitely be traces of the secret technique being used. Moreover, that kind of secret technique could only be predicted when the situation was absolutely stable. Usually, a third party would predict the future and inform the battle partner. It was impossible to predict the future while fighting. However, if the other party had only relied on his brain to calculate, the power of his calculations was too incredible. He was a dignified, strong man of the 10,000 saints, and any one of his moves could destroy the heavens and the earth. How could he predict this? In fact, that was indeed the truth. From the very beginning, Su Yu had not locked onto its heart, but its armpit. Everything that had happened before, including allowing the puppet to obtain the real absolute heaven sword, had been Su Yu's intention. He wanted the puppet to let down its guard and mistakenly believe that the person it had killed the second time was the real Su Yu. However, he did not expect that the real Su Yu had only just made his move. Updates will continue at 8:30 p.m. Please remember the domain name of this book. Mobile version. Chapter 3100. After a series of calculations, Su Yu had finally found the perfect opportunity to strike. In the blink of an eye, Su Yu pushed the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations to the limit and accurately struck the opponent's armpit. The other parts of the blue heart puppet were extremely hard. Even the absolute heaven sword and the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations could not harm it. But right now, the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations had easily cut into the blue heart puppet's bones. The blue heart puppet seemed to have been tortured. Even though it was a 10,000 saint, it let out a shrill scream. Based on its experience, this kind of injury should not have caused it to react in the slightest. But now it was in such excruciating pain. Just as the puppet's ancestor had said, the armpit was one of its fatal weaknesses. As expected, on the surface of the blue heart puppet's body, the blue heart iron, which had been tempered for countless years, began to bubble, as if it was about to break free from the blue heart puppet. Suyu was delighted. He used all the strength in his body to flick the blue heart iron toward its armpit. If this had been a normal flick, it would have been enough to strike a fatal blow and kill it. But was the blue heart puppet an ordinary person? It clamped its right arm, using its arm strength to clamp the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations under its armpit, preventing Suyu from continuing to strike. If it had been an ordinary person, they would probably have been at a loss. But who was Suyu? At the critical moment, Suyu did not hesitate to activate his mature human saint body. A turbulent, majestic power of the saint body surged into his palm. His strength increased by 30%. With a forceful flick, he broke free from the blue heart puppet's restraints, and the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations sliced down from above. Ah! The blue heart puppet screamed. But the moment the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations lost control, its body tilted to one side. The great scythe of 10,000 tribulations did not slash down toward its armpit. Instead, it cut off its right arm. Its right arm, along with the absolute heaven sword in its hand, was severed. A blue pearl could be seen where the arm was severed. It was none other than the blue heart pearl that provided the blue heart puppet with an endless supply of energy. The blue heart iron was attached to the skeleton, and it could only be maintained with energy. This blue heart bead was an important source of energy, second only to the blue heart iron heart. Once it was lost, the blue heart iron on the skeleton would peel off, just like the bubbles that had just appeared. Without the blue heart iron, there was a limit to how strong the 10,000 Saint Expert's corpse was. With their strength, they could completely suppress it. Unfortunately, the blue heart puppet dodged instinctively at the last moment, causing Suyu's efforts to be in vain. "I'll kill you." The blue heart puppet was completely exposed. Never in his dreams would he have thought that he would actually suffer the sneak attack of a puny human and nearly lose his life. Suyu's reaction was extremely fast. Since his plan had failed, he didn't have any time to be depressed. He grabbed the severed arm and the absolute heaven sword with a backhand, then quickly left. When the blue heart puppet fought back, Suyu used the same trick once again and displayed the soul mist. The blue heart puppet, which had suffered a great loss, became cautious. After dispersing the dense fog, it saw Suyu, who was not far away. However, it did not dare to attack recklessly, for fear of falling into the enemy's hands again. The two forefathers, Mo Hung, and the rest who were watching from afar all gasped. If they had not witnessed it with their own eyes, they would have found it hard to believe that a person who had not even reached the ancient saint realm was able to fight against a greater saint realm expert with a scheme. No, he had the upper hand. Not only had he almost killed the opponent, but he had also chopped off one of the opponent's arms. Whoosh! The ripples beside the two of them shook, and Suyu appeared. He put away the absolute heaven sword, and the severed arm in his hand underwent a drastic change. The blue heart iron on it lost its power, turning into bubbles. After the bubbles burst, the blue heart iron quickly cracked. A large area of the blue heart iron peeled off and fell. Suyu immediately kept the blue heart iron that had fallen, not leaving a single bit behind. These were all rare treasures. How could he waste them? Apart from that, there was also a complete severed arm of the greater saint. Even as he held it in his hand, Suyu could feel a frightening power that made him shudder with fear. If he could use it, this arm could become an unparalleled weapon that could injure people. He exerted a sealing spell and kept the arm as well. The blue heart puppet, who had noticed this scene from afar, had a sinister expression. The blue flames in its eyes danced intensely. It said in a low voice, "Human, you have really angered me." A boundless murderous aura quickly swept over with it as the epicenter. Suyu's expression was calm, and he said indifferently, "You speak as if you would have shown me mercy if I hadn't provoked you." From its actions after it had appeared, it was obvious that it wanted to kill everyone present. "No, if you hadn't provoked me, you would have died. But if you provoked me, you would have suffered a fate worse than death." Swoosh! As soon as it finished speaking, the blue heart puppet disappeared into thin air. Without a doubt, Its words just now were to stall for time, to attract the attention of Su Yu and the others so that it could teleport through time and kill them with a single blow. But right at that moment, the giant puppet, whose body was half buried in the ground in the Saint Clan's territory, suddenly opened its eyes. A towering giant palm stretched out from the ground abruptly, slamming into the air. Bang! That palm actually cut off the blue heart puppet, whose speed was so fast that it could teleport through time. The giant palm slammed down fiercely, slapping the blue heart puppet, who was caught off guard, onto the ground and pinning it down. Rumble! At the same time, the giant puppet crawled out of the ground, its enormous, majestic figure covering the sky and the sun. Suyu revealed a look of relief. He had fought the blue heart puppet with all his might, but it was not a desperate battle. He was only stalling for time for the puppet ancestor. It would be best if he could kill the blue heart puppet, but even if he couldn't, he could still buy enough time for the puppet ancestor to use the giant puppet. Now it seemed that they had succeeded. Damn it, you have deceived the Abyss Puppet Clan for several eras. You can't absolve yourself from death. The puppet ancestor was furious. Not only had the Abyss Puppet Clan been deceived for several eras, but they had also almost been wiped out. How could the puppet ancestor feel at ease if he did not destroy such a deep-seated hatred? The blue heart puppet had been attacked twice, and it was furious. It used one arm to prop itself up from the ground, using its own body to prop up the giant puppet's palm. You bunch of ants are the ones who should be ground to dust. The blue heart puppet roared, pushing up with one arm with all its might. The giant puppet lost control of its body, and it staggered and almost fell to the ground. Fortunately, the puppet ancestor's skills were superb, and he stepped on it in time. Bang! The entire Santian mountain trembled violently because of this stomp. The blue heart puppet's body let out an unbearable explosive sound, and under the nervous gazes of the crowd, it burst into pieces in an instant. The people watching from afar all cheered wildly. It was hard to believe that they had really killed a strong fighter of all saints who had appeared out of nowhere. Only Su Yu and the few ancestors remained solemn. They could feel that although the blue heart puppet's body had been destroyed, its consciousness was unharmed. Updated tomorrow morning. Chapter 3101. As expected, the crushed fragments of the blue heart puppet wriggled and gathered together again, quickly reassembling into a complete blue heart puppet. Seeing this, the cheering crowd felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over them, and their hearts turned cold. The puppet ancestor's face was especially gloomy. After countless years of refinement, the blue heart puppet had already achieved an indestructible blue heart iron body. Even if its body was shattered, it could recover instantly. It was impossible to kill it. With a hint of despair in his eyes, he shouted in a low voice, "Lie down." The giant palm stomped down fiercely, crushing the blue heart puppet into pieces again. However, it had no effect. The blue heart puppet immediately recovered. Then, as the puppet ancestor stomped on it again and again, the blue heart puppet recovered again and again. Every time, it made the people present feel a little more despair. Stomp, stomp. Thanks to you, I already have an indestructible body. The blue heart puppet laughed ferociously. When you can't stomp anymore, it will be time for me to slaughter all of you. The giant puppet controlled by the puppet ancestor relied on energy to function. It could not be stomped endlessly. Eventually, there would be a time when its energy would be exhausted. When that time came, there would be no powerful force that could compete with the invincible body of the blue heart puppet. It would be the end of the entire Santia Mountain. The faces of the green wood ancestor and the netherworld ancestor were gloomy. They had provoked an existence that would not leave them alone. It was dangerous, unkillable, and full of murderous intent to take revenge on them. Cauldron Zune, what should we do? The greenwood ancestor looked at Suyu. Among them, only Suyu might have a way to compete with the blue heart puppet. However, unexpectedly, Suyu said seriously, inform the sinful lady to lead the cauldron and all the members of the cauldron out of the Tsangtian mountain. The further the better. Retreat? When the two ancestors heard this, their hearts sank. Even the Cauldron Zune could do nothing about it. No, with the blue heart puppet's indestructible body. Who could do anything to it? The netherworld ancestor pondered. Cauldron Zune, why don't you try to attack again and attack its vital parts? Didn't Suyu almost destroy the blue heart pearl on his arm and kill him just now? If he could do it again, he would definitely succeed. However, Suyu shook his head slightly, his gaze fixed on the blue heart puppet that was continuously recovering. He asked, would you fall at the same place twice? The netherworld old ancestor understood what Suyu meant and sighed silently. What a pity. Just now, Suyu had performed a series of tricks and almost dealt a fatal blow to the blue heart puppet. That was his only chance. Having learned its lesson, the blue heart puppet would not give Suyu any more chances. If I attack now, it will give the blue heart puppet a chance to escape. Suyu understood. The reason the blue heart puppet had been continuously crushed was because it hadn't had a chance to attack. Every time it recovered, it would be crushed by the puppet patriarch. If Suyu, the third party, intervened, perhaps the blue heart puppet could use an external force to break free from the cycle of destruction. By then, it would not be easy to trample on the blue heart puppet. Do as I say. Immediately command all the creatures on the Songtian mountain to retreat. If they're unwilling, let them be. Suyu said. There were still a small number of forces on the Songtian mountain who had not joined the Cauldron. If they were willing to listen to Suyu's advice, then so be it. If not, Suyu had no time to care about them. What about Cauldron Zune? The Greenwood ancestor understood what Suyu was implying. It would be more convincing if he went himself. Why'd he ask them to go? Suyu said, I will stay here and try to buy more time for you. Go now. The Greenwood ancestor and the Netherworld old ancestor were moved. At the juncture of life and death, Suyu had not abandoned them. Instead, he was using his life to buy time for them. This was easy to say, but how many people in the world could actually do it? Most leaders use their forces as tools to protect their own interests, but Suyu was the only one who would use his own life to protect the interests of the forces under his command. The Greenwood ancestor had been hesitant, but now he had made up his mind. He had been hesitant about whether to join the Cauldron completely. He had only been tempted because the Netherworld old ancestor had removed his clan and completely integrated into the Cauldron. But now, there was no more hesitation. Such a leader was hard to find in the world. What else did the Greenwood Divine clan have to hesitate about? We await the return of the Cauldron Master. The two ancestors bowed and immediately went back to inform everyone to retreat. Suyu leaped onto the head of the giant puppet and said, Puppet Ancestor, is there anything else you need to say? At this point, the puppet ancestor could neither escape nor kill the blue heart puppet. In the end, the giant puppet could only be killed by the blue heart puppet after it lost its power. As an old monster who had lived for countless years, he should have understood this. The puppet ancestor's voice was hoarse, and his eyes were full of sorrow. One careless move, and we lost everything. We, the Abyss puppets, asked for it, and we have nothing to do with anyone. I don't blame anyone. In fact, I should thank you for snatching the blue hard iron heart and preventing this crafty, all-saints strong man from succeeding, the puppet ancestor said with a sigh. If he had obtained the blue hard iron heart, I probably wouldn't even be able to crush him now. By then, he would really be invincible in the world, and we, the Abyss puppets, would not be able to rest in peace. Fortunately, you snatched the heart, and he is still not a complete blue hard iron puppet. Suyu listened silently. He knew that the puppet ancestor must have other instructions. You can take the heart with you. Find a suitable puppet or a suitable body, and fuse the heart into it. That way, you might be able to create a different existence. The puppet ancestor's voice was getting hoarser and hoarser, and he was even a little tired. Manipulating the giant puppet consumed a lot of his energy. Suyu understood what he was implying. The blue heart puppet could be fused into the body of a living creature. This was an artificial heart. This is the secret technique to fuse the heart. Remember it well. The puppet ancestor once again passed on the fusion technique to Suyu through the technique of vibrating the meridians. Suyu accepted it silently and said, Is there anything else? The puppet ancestor chuckled. I would like to ask you to avenge the Abyss puppets, but that is not realistic. The blue heart puppet had reached the point of immortality, and no one in the world could kill it. It was even more impossible for Suyu to do so. I have nothing to tell you. I only hope that if you can find the other branches of the Abyss puppets, you must pass on the ancestral techniques that we, the Abyss puppets, have mastered to them. The puppet ancestor's voice was filled with infinite sorrow. A scripture, flickering with fluorescent light, gushed out of the giant puppet's body and landed in front of Suyu. Updated at 8:30 p.m. Please remember the domain name of this book. Mobile version. Chapter 3102. The scriptures were all written in the language of the heavenly book. Suyu glanced at them and saw the ancestral technique flickering. Suyu grasped it, his heart inexplicably touched. Of all things in the world, only living creatures had sustenance outside of life. Their entire race had been destroyed, but they still hoped that their heritage would not be destroyed, so that their race could continue to exist in the world in another form. This was the pleading of life for continuation. It was both humble and worthy of respect. I will. Suyu clenched it tightly and added, also, I will avenge you. Leave the blue heart puppet to me. The puppet ancestor smiled with difficulty. Then, thank you very much. A smile was all that mattered, not to mention that there was no life and death feud between them. Suyu cupped his fists and turned to the foot of the giant puppet. Looking at the blue heart puppet that had been restored, he took out the blue heart iron heart and said lightly, if you want the heart, come and find me. If it's gone, I can't guarantee that I will use it on someone else. As he spoke, he flew off in another direction. The blue heart puppet was furious. Stop right there. The blue heart puppet's body had already been refined for an epoch. During this epoch, it had endured the entire time, not revealing the existence of its consciousness, also that the idiots of the sacred puppet race could refine the blue heart iron heart for it. For this, it had waited for an entire era in torment. In the end, when it finally succeeded, Suyu suddenly appeared and snatched it away. It struggled with all its might, trying to break free from the giant puppet's oppression. Humph! Where do you think you're going? The puppet ancestor snorted coldly and stepped down, crushing the blue heart puppet. The latter was furious. Old thing, I will grind your bones to dust. Looking at the furious blue heart puppet, the puppet ancestor could not help but laugh. Evil creature, you want the blue heart, iron heart. Dream on. As he spoke, he kept crushing the blue heart puppet with his foot. The latter was angry, but could not get rid of it. It could only be delayed in its anger and curses. One day passed. The giant puppet's continuous stomps caused the entire Sangtian mountain to sink by 1/10. But the blue heart puppet was indeed made of blue heart iron. Even though the giant puppet had used up most of its energy, it was still in perfect condition. The puppet ancestor panted, his red face turning pale. He looked at Sangtian Mountain, which had been completely evacuated half a day ago, and murmured, I have tried my best. Looking at the Sangtian Mountain that he had been familiar with for an epoch, the puppet patriarch sighed with emotion. He had never thought that there would be a day where he would sacrifice himself to buy time for the forces he looked down on in Hidden Sky Mountain. Take care of yourselves. The puppet patriarch sighed deeply and slumped to the ground. The giant puppet's energy was exhausted, and its footsteps became slower and slower. Finally, when the blue heart puppet reformed from its fragmented state, before the giant puppet's foot had even landed, the blue heart puppet finally had a chance to attack. Bang! Blue heart's puppet suddenly raised its right arm, blocking the giant puppet's foot. No matter how much strength the giant puppet exerted, it was unable to shatter the foot. Now, are you ready to bid farewell to this world? The blue heart puppet revealed a sinister smile. It wrapped its arms around the giant puppet's foot, and then, with a furious roar, it unleashed a mountain-moving, sea-draining force. It lifted the giant puppet, which was 100 times its size, and fiercely smashed it onto the ground. Rumble, with this smash, Sangtian Mountain was shaved off by 30%. Several cracks had also appeared on the giant puppet, and the puppet patriarch in the control room was vomiting blood incessantly. But this was only the beginning. As if taking revenge, the blue heart puppet threw the giant puppet back and forth. Songtian Mountain, one of the best spiritual lands in the cloud-desolate territory, was razed to the ground, revealing the spiritual veins hidden beneath the ground. Then, the spiritual veins violently shook and were destroyed. As for the giant puppet, after several violent collisions, it was finally unable to bear the burden and broke apart. The right leg that the blue heart puppet was holding was directly separated from its body. The colossal body of the giant puppet crashed to the ground. Flickering sparks were emitting from all over its body, and thick black smoke was rising from its body. The blue heart puppet grinned sinisterly as it walked to the giant puppet's head. With a stomp of its foot, the head instantly shattered, revealing the puppet ancestor who was on the verge of death. It jumped in and looked down at the puppet ancestor on the ground with its hands behind its back. It said in an incomparably sinister voice, "Old thing, are you ready to die?" The puppet ancestor's expression was calm. He looked at the blue heart puppet and laughed. "How I die is not up to you to decide." HM, the blue heart puppet sensed that something was amiss. It looked around and suddenly discovered that the puppet ancestor's hand, which was pressing down on the ground, seemed to be holding something. When it looked closely, it saw that it was an extremely eye-catching blood-red handle, as if it was some important mechanism. The blue heart puppet's heart jumped. It realized that something was wrong and was about to leave. However, the puppet ancestor laughed resolutely. "Come, let's die together." Crack! The moment the handle was pulled down, the giant puppet's head emitted an unprecedentedly violent explosion. This was a self-destruction mechanism that the giant puppet had designed when it was first refined. In order to prevent the giant puppet from falling into the hands of an enemy, the Abyss puppet race could use a mechanism to detonate the giant puppet's self-destruction mechanism, causing the puppet and the enemy to perish together. Through their calculations, the power of the explosion was infinitely close to the attack of a myriad saint powerhouse. Boom! The world instantly fell into a blinding white. The flames of the explosion radiated out into billions of mountains and rivers, destroying everything within its range. At the center of the explosion, all sound was swallowed up by the explosion, leaving behind only a roar that replaced everything else. The ground where the hidden heaven mountain was located began to disintegrate, and the nearby vegetation disappeared. In the end, even the giant puppet itself was shattered, disintegrating into particles. Somewhere, the blue heart puppet that hadn't been able to escape in time reared its head back and roared in pain. In the impact of the explosion, its body was like a shadow in the daytime, slowly dissipating. The shockwave from the powerful explosion set off tsunami-like smoke and dust, sweeping in all directions. The creatures of the hidden heaven mountain, who had been gone for half a day, stood on a mountain, looking at the red and white flames in the sky, their eyes filled with shock. In another direction, Suyu stood silently, a complicated look in his eyes. He heaved a long sigh and said, "Rest in peace." He took out the space storage device, and with a thought, the bodies of the 3 ancient sages of the Saint Puppet clan appeared in front of him. In fact, to be precise, the Saint Puppet clan hadn't been wiped out. Previously, the bodies of 3 ancient sages had been possessed by Suyu. Their bodies had been placed in the space storage device, so they hadn't died. The 3 of them were at a loss for a moment. After Suyu briefly described the situation, they looked at the red light of the explosion that had faded behind them, hugging their heads and crying bitterly. Please remember the original domain name of this book, mobile version website. Chapter 3103. There are only 3 of you left in the Puppet Saint clan. You will be responsible for carrying forward the legacy of your ancestor before he died. Suyu handed over the legacy of the Abyss Puppet ancestor to the 3 of them. The 3 of them looked at each other, but no one took it. Instead, they bowed. Since Cauldron Master was entrusted by the ancestor, we are willing to follow Cauldron Master from now on. Today's 9-star civilization was in turmoil. If the 3 of them obtained the legacy, not only would they not be able to carry forward the Abyss Puppet ancestor, but they would also be targeted by many powerful evil forces. Instead of that, it was better to follow Cauldron Master and slowly develop the Abyss Puppet ancestor. If you insist, I welcome you at any time. Suyu took back the scripture and said, "However, you have to complete a task first." The three of them were delighted. "Cauldron Master, please speak." Suyu flicked his fingers, and 3 lumps of light entered their minds. "Everything that I wanted to say is contained within it." After Suyu spoke, he leaped into the air and left without stopping. The 3 of them were in a trance. After confirming the information in the lumps of light, they were all shocked, speechless for a long time. "Cauldron Master, are you serious?" One of the ancient saints was stunned. The other 2 ancient saints were also shocked for a long time. This is ridiculous. Is he really on our side?" Suyu's request was so shocking that they began to doubt Suyu's position. The 3rd ancient saint said, "Since you have chosen to join Cauldron Master, don't waver." Cauldron Master chose to sacrifice himself to distract the blue heart puppet for the sake of the creatures of Sangtian Mountain. There should be no problem with his position. The other 2 ancient saints hesitated for a while and chose to believe Suyu. The 3 of them left in an instant. Amidst the crackling sounds from the burning ruins of Sangtian Mountain, a charred black object suddenly exploded, spewing out a blue fluorescent light. Those were all materials of the blue hard iron. After they landed, they continued to wriggle towards a deep pit. In other directions, large and small fluorescent lights quickly rushed over and gathered in the deep pit. Puff! A pale white skeletal hand suddenly stretched out from the scorched earth. Then another hand crawled out, then the head, then the body, and finally the whole body. "Damned ant," the skeleton said resentfully. He was naturally the blue heart puppet that hadn't died. At this moment, his body was covered in cracks, and most of the blue heart iron had fallen off. Only a few places remained. However, the blue heart bead on his severed arm was still there, attracting the gathered blue heart iron to the surface of his body. Not long after, the blue heart golem recovered. Apart from his empty right arm, he glanced sideways at his right arm, his eyes filled with killing intent. "Little bastard, you've done me a lot of harm." His torch-like eyes swept across the sky, and at the same time he found a group of creatures from the Sangtian Mountain and Suyu. The 2 were in the opposite direction. He had the intention to catch up with Suyu and kill all the creatures on the Sangtian Mountain. However, if he did that, he was afraid that he would never be able to catch up with Suyu. Although he knew that Suyu was trying to save the creatures of the Sangtian Mountain, he had no choice but to be led by the nose by Suyu. "Exterminate that little bastard first, then exterminate these ants." The blue heart puppet leaped up, directly disappearing into the sky. Suyu, who was in the chicken wing, suddenly felt his chest heave violently. Did the blue heart puppet catch up, or... Suyu waved his storage device, and the little skeleton, who had transformed into a fire lion, jumped out. He also felt that there was an extraordinary aura behind him that was rapidly approaching. He couldn't help but grin. "Little ancestor, do you dare to provoke some enemies that you can defeat?" The first ancestor of the Soul Saint clan hadn't been dealt with yet, and now another terrifying existence had appeared. The little skeleton couldn't imagine how Suyu had managed to survive until today, provoking this and that. Suyu said lightly, "Provoke? I'm saving myself." "Huh?" The little skeleton was stunned and suddenly thought of something. "Could it be that you provoked this terrifying thing in the first place to deal with the first ancestor?" Suyu said lightly, "Otherwise, why do you think I ran back to the Sangtian Mountain?" He had long since discovered that there was something wrong with this puppet. Otherwise, he wouldn't have returned to the Sangtian Mountain so decisively. "Oh my God, you took such a huge risk just to lure that terrifying thing out to deal with the first ancestor?" The little skeleton was incredulous. There were too many unpredictable risks. How could Suyu be sure that he could meet the first ancestor again before the terrifying thing behind him caught up? How could he ensure that the first ancestor and the thing behind him would fight each other? "Little master, you'd better run away quickly." The little skeleton's face changed. "You've underestimated the intelligence of 2 people who are suspected to be at the level of all saints at the same time." This trick of shifting the blame was a trick that those old monsters had played when they were sick of. It was a fool's dream to want to trigger a life-and-death battle between the 2 sides. As soon as they met, they would be able to guess that this was deliberately arranged by Suyu to provoke them into a fight and then reap the spoils from the sidelines. If they saw through Suyu's plan, would they be fooled? Suyu had thought too highly of these petty tricks. I acknowledge their intelligence, but I acknowledge my own even more. Suyu looked up at the sky, his eyes filled with a hint of determination. The little skeleton howled, but could only grit its teeth and run for its life. But it did not have any expectations for Suyu's future. It sighed silently in its heart. The poor Qing emperor endured for an era, and all his efforts are going to go to waste. The Qing emperor must have trusted the wrong person. Whoosh! The two of them, one chasing the other, fled for their lives in the endless void once more. The blue heart puppet was extremely fast, not any slower than the first ancestor. It quickly closed the distance between them. The distance between them was not far. After just half a day, the little skeleton looked back and could already see the flickering blue light at the end of the world. It was about to catch up. The first ancestor in Suyu's plan had yet to appear. The little skeleton was sad. How could this be so accurate? The first ancestor was not his marionette. How could he appear in front of the enemy according to his plan? Finally, the blue heart puppet closed the distance again. Even from a distance, the blue heart puppet's cold laughter could be heard. You can't run away. Suyu's eyes were calm. He took out the blue heart iron heart and said lightly, "First ancestor, if you don't show yourself, I'll return this heart to that monster." Swish! Almost as soon as he finished speaking, his vision blurred. The first ancestor, who had been suppressed by the Heavenly Law Alliance, appeared in front of Suyu. Her expression was the same, but there was a hint of murderous intent in her eyes as she looked at Suyu, as well as a hint of fear. "Trying to trick me again," the first ancestor said coldly. "Tomorrow night, watch period." Chapter 3104. She had successfully escaped from the giant net-like seal of the Heavenly Law Alliance and was chasing after Suyu's aura. Who would have thought that Suyu would come knocking on her door? Having been tricked once, the first ancestor was naturally more cautious. She had hidden herself to see what Suyu was up to. In the end, she was certain that Suyu was plotting against her, and he actually knew that she was in the vicinity. He had even planned to shift the blame to her and trigger a fight between her and the unknown being that was chasing after her. "Your plan is really clumsy," the first ancestor said calmly. She took a step back. Not only did she not take the heart, but she also distanced herself from the conflict between Suyu and the blue heart puppet. Her goal was to kill Suyu. It made no difference whether she killed him herself or Suyu was killed by someone else. So what if this seemingly strange heart fell into the hands of the puppet? Did it have anything to do with her? Isn't Suyu too childish? Or does he think that I'm a fool because he has successfully schemed against me once? She wanted to see how Suyu would deal with the unknown being alone. Roar! The blue heart puppet approached quickly. It would arrive a few breaths' time and kill Suyu immediately. When that happened, Suyu would not be able to last long in front of the blue heart puppet. His death was a foregone conclusion. At such a critical juncture, Suyu did something that no one had expected. He threw the blue heart iron heart to the first ancestor. The first ancestor, who saw this scene from afar, shook her head slightly. Suyu must have been driven into a corner. How could he do such a meaningless thing? She shifted her body to the void beside her, avoiding the blue heart iron heart. However, a shocking scene occurred. She had clearly moved away, but the blue heart iron heart seemed to have grown eyes and followed her. Moreover, it predicted where she would move and appeared there ahead of time. As a result, the blue heart iron heart hit the first ancestor's body. Who is it? The first ancestor swept the blue heart iron heart away with her palm and looked up into the sky, her expression grave. She was in existence at the level of all saints and had long since surpassed the scope of ordinary creatures. Her future was not something that ordinary people could predict. Unfortunately, in the empty void, no one could respond to her. What made her even more preoccupied was that she suddenly felt the back of her hand heat up. She looked down and saw that the back of her hand was actually stained with some blue fluorescence. The fluorescent light drilled into his flesh and blood, forming a faint heart-shaped pattern. Not far away, the blue heart iron heart was gradually disappearing. The first ancestor's careless attack had actually attracted the blue heart iron heart to invade his body. A glint flashed in her eyes as a destructive force of myriad saints surged out from her palm, trying to expel the fluorescent light that had invaded her body. However, the fluorescent light had already fused with his flesh and blood, becoming a part of his body. Visible to the naked eye, a blue heart pattern slowly and powerfully beat on the back of her hand. The blue heart iron heart in the air had disappeared without a trace. The heart had already been inserted into the body of the first ancestor. The first ancestor's face was extremely gloomy as she stared at Suyu with her beautiful eyes. "Did you do all of this?" Suyu shrugged his shoulders and said indifferently, "You think too highly of me. I haven't even reached the stage where I can predict the trajectory of an all-saint strongman. The person who is plotting against you is in the sky." He pointed to the top of his head. Without a doubt, it was none other than the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain. First Ancestor remained silent. She already knew the answer. The person who was plotting against her was indeed the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain. Only the being up there could predict her trajectory and successfully implant the blue heart iron heart into her body. However, the first ancestor was a little uncertain. "Are you in cahoots with the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain? What do you think?" Suyu asked. The first ancestor was a little confused. If Suyu was in cahoots with the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain, then why was Suyu being chased by the stone men in the heavenly law prison? However, if not, how could Suyu be sure that the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain would secretly attack him? Could it be that he had already predicted that the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain would definitely plot against her and force her to become enemies with the blue heart puppet? If that was the case, wouldn't every move of the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain be under the control of Suyu, a human? Wasn't this too terrifying? This was the first time she had heard of someone being able to plot against the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain. Just as she was in shock and bewilderment, the powerful breath finally arrived. Looking at the blue one-armed puppet in front of her, her beautiful eyes shimmered, and she accurately identified the other party's identity. "You are the All Saints of the human race 7 years ago, Tuobalu, right?" "What?" Suyu was secretly taken aback. He hadn't expected the blue heart puppet who was chasing him to kill him to be a strong All Saint of the human race. The blue heart puppet stopped in its tracks abruptly, its gaze fixed on the first ancestor. It hesitantly asked, "Are you from a Soul Saint clan?" Between the two of them, there was an invisible collision of auras, and they were both on guard against each other, especially the blue heart puppet, because it sensed a hint of danger. Its body was strong and invincible, and it feared no one, but its soul was not. Coincidentally, the Soul Saint clan was its nemesis. "I've heard of your name for a long time, Tuobalu." The first ancestor sighed silently. Back then, when she was still an ordinary ancestor of the Soul Saint clan, Tuobalu was already a famous hero of the human race. Afterward, for some unknown reason, Tuobalu disappeared from the 9-star civilization. Unexpectedly, when they saw him again, he had already been refined into a puppet. The changes of the world were really unexpected. The blue heart puppet was also filled with emotion. "I didn't expect that there would still be someone in this world who remembers me, Tuobalu." "Ha!" It laughed, its gaze falling on the back of the first ancestor's hand. "Can you return that heart to me? It is very important to me." The first ancestor had no intention of fighting to the death with Tuobalu. She was exceptionally straightforward. "Sure. However, it is a little special, and it seems like I can't take it off." The blue heart puppet nodded and took half a step forward. "I have a way to deal with it, and that is for you to die." The blue heart puppet, who was still sighing with emotion just a moment ago, suddenly had an ominous glint in its eyes. It ordered the killer to attack immediately. A blue beam of light shot out from its eyes, piercing through the space at an unbelievable speed, and reached straight for the first ancestor's body. The first ancestor blinked nonchalantly. "I knew you were up to no good." Her body, which was struck by the blue beam of light, instantly shattered and turned into powder. The blue heart puppet's expression changed. "Illusion technique?" Even Suyu could use the Soul Saint clan's illusion technique to perfection, let alone the first ancestor. Swish! Not far away, the first ancestor's figure reappeared. Her expression was slightly cold, and she was a little angry and helpless. She didn't want to become enemies with the blue heart puppet for no reason, but now it seemed like she had no other choice. Before we fight, can you get rid of this annoying human first? The first ancestor naturally didn't forget about Suyu. She didn't want Suyu to be able to reap the benefits from the side. The blue heart puppet looked at Suyu and grinned eerily. Of course, if it weren't for Suyu, the little brute, meddling, the blue heart iron heart would have long since fused into its body. How could it have ended up in this situation? /book_2063/LGenius1 second remembered website address. Mobile version. Chapter 3105. The two 10,000 saints stared at Suyu at the same time. They had reached an agreement to kill Suyu first. The first ancestor looked at him mockingly. Why? Did you foresee that we would kill you first? Wasn't Suyu able to trick even the Saint Mountain's emperor? Then, did he foresee his own end? Unexpectedly, Suyu's face was calm, and he said with an indifferent attitude, "So be it. It's not my real body anyway." What? The blue heart puppet was shocked, looking at the first ancestor. His soul was no longer what it used to be, and he could not tell whether Suyu was real or not. However, the first ancestor was an elder of the Saint clan. Could she not tell? The first ancestor's eyes flashed, and the next moment, she appeared in front of Suyu, patting his shoulder lightly. The next moment, Suyu disappeared like smoke. It was indeed Suyu's soul illusion technique. The first ancestor sighed helplessly. His soul ancestral technique is higher than mine. Although she was unwilling to admit it, Suyu is indeed the only person in the last 10 eras who had successfully cultivated the soul ancestral technique. She had only cultivated 80% of it, and there was still the other 20% that she could not succeed in. Therefore, if Suyu had used the soul ancestral technique, she would not have been able to tell if he was real or not. This cunning bastard, the blue heart puppet, was filled with hatred. It had just been born and thought that it could return to the world and dominate the universe. But it had been tricked by this junior of the same clan. The first ancestor scanned the surroundings with her beautiful eyes, hoping to find Suyu. The blue heart puppet waved its hand wearily. There is no need to look for him. Since he wants to reap the benefits of others, he must have hidden himself well. The blue heart puppet, who had fought with Suyu several times, no longer wanted to waste its energy on him. The most important thing now was to obtain the blue heart iron heart, so that it could become a complete puppet. Although this body was strong, it had a fatal weakness. Ordinary people might not be able to do anything to it, but it would be quite dangerous if it encountered a peerless expert. For example, the first ancestor in front of him. After she withdrew her gaze, she looked thoughtfully at the blue heart puppet's damaged chest, as well as the faintly discernible blue heart pearl where its broken arm was. Other than killing me, is there no other way to take out the Blusthard heart? The first patriarch lifted his wrist, where the mark of the Blusthard heart pulsed. The blue heart puppet's body was covered in a layer of faint blue light, and it said helplessly, "If I said I did, would you believe me?" First ancestor shook his head. Of course, he didn't believe it. Just then, the blue heart puppet had used its sneak attack to tell her that only by killing her would the blue heart iron heart drop. Then what else is there to say? Shall we fight to the death? The blue heart puppet said gravely. First ancestor sighed and frowned. I really don't want to fight, especially when I'm being schemed against. She was in a terrible mood. She knew that she had been tricked into a fight to the death, but she had no choice but to carry it out. She was disgusted by this kind of overt plot. Then, I'll make my move against you. The blue heart puppet had no choice but to take the initiative to attack. The blue light on its body transformed into a tsunami that howled towards the first ancestor. First ancestor remained calm. She spread her fingers, and an invisible soul net appeared in front of her, blocking the blue light. At the same time, two corporeal rays of light flashed through her eyes. The blue heart puppet groaned. Its soul was intensely stimulated, but it gritted its teeth and endured. The blue light in front of it suddenly expanded and rushed over with overwhelming force, wrapping around the first ancestor. But since the first ancestor was a 10,000 saint expert, how could she so easily crystallize? She flicked her 10 fingers, each flick opening up a space. After flicking her 10 fingers, she had already pierced through the tsunami. No matter how much the tsunami struck her, it couldn't harm her at all. The battle between the two had only just begun. The real battle was yet to come. First ancestor decisively used a soul ancestral technique. A beautiful mark curled around her fingertip, carrying with it a thick Tao of the soul. In that instant, it was like a yellow spring that carried billions of souls surged over. The blue heart puppet laughed. Good. This is the first time I've returned to this world that I'm fighting a serious battle. With a stroke of her index finger, she also displayed an ancestral technique. Although that ancestral technique wasn't as profound as the soul ancestral technique, it was extremely complete. It wasn't much weaker than the incomplete soul ancestral technique of the first ancestor. The two soul ancestral techniques collided in the air. Boom, boom. The entire void was turned upside down. The nearby space was in chaos, and time was flowing in reverse. Far away, Su Yu, who was sitting cross-legged in a galaxy, was affected by the battle between the two 10,000 saints. The galaxy beneath Su Yu's feet flowed rapidly, colliding and annihilating each other. His robe fluttered wildly as he looked at the great battle at the end of the world. His heart yearned. Is that the battle of the 10,000 saints? If he reached that level one day, there wouldn't be many places in the entire 9-star civilization that could stop him, right? He clenched his fists. He was even more determined to obtain the legacy of the human ancestor. The heavenly road. He had to climb the heavenly road, reach the end of it, and become the second human ancestor since ancient times. No, he had to surpass the former human ancestor. No matter how strong the human ancestor was, he was still defeated by the emperor of the Holy Mountain. If he wanted to surpass the Holy Mountain, he had to surpass the former human ancestor. He waited silently. The battle between the two sides lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. In those 3 days, Su Yu had retreated 10 times, each time a distance of trillions of mountains and rivers. Their battles grew fiercer and fiercer, especially the last time, when a world-destroying brilliance erupted. The shock wave engulfed the entire cloud-desolate territory. Apart from strong men like Su Yu, most of them died in their battles. What was reflected in Su Yu's eyes was a scorched land with no signs of life. The cloud-desolate territory had been completely destroyed. This was the battle between the 10,000 saints. However, after the last blow, the whole world returned to peace. The winner of the battle between them must have been decided. Su Yu stood up, took out a jade pendant, and sent a message to the 3 ancient saints he had instructed. After doing this, he rode on the little lion and rushed to the center of the battle. The closer he got to the center, the more he could feel the destruction. Waves of destructive energy reverberated in the air, strangling the remaining energy in the atmosphere. Billions of mountains and rivers away from the center of the battle, there was not even the slightest trace of spiritual energy, let alone path energy. Moreover, Su Yu and the little skeleton had to protect themselves with the power of the heavenly law master to move forward. Otherwise, they would have been killed by the chaotic flow of destructive energy. After moving forward with great difficulty, they finally arrived at the center of the battle. In an area that was almost empty, the first ancestor was lying on the ground, and the blue heart puppet was standing where it was. Su Yu sighed silently. It was the first ancestor who had fallen. He was a little surprised, and he felt a little sorry for the Soul Saint tribe. If Su Yu had not appeared, perhaps the Soul Saint tribe would not have lost a pillar like the first ancestor. However, the next moment, Su Yu's eyes changed slightly. This is not right. Please remember the original domain name of this book. Mobile version website. Chapter 3106. He keenly sensed that the consciousness of the blue heart puppet had dissipated into dust and ceased to exist. The little skeleton also sensed it and immediately crouched down, its four claws wriggling restlessly. As expected, just as Suyu had sensed, the upright blue heart puppet suddenly fell to the ground with a thud. The consciousness in its body had been completely wiped out by the first ancestor's secret soul technique. The first ancestor, who was lying on the ground, moved her fingers and sat up with difficulty. She was panting, and her youthful face was filled with deep exhaustion and weakness. She was a strong martial artist of the All Saints level, but she was only good at the soul, and her body was her weakness. Although the blue heart puppet's consciousness was weak, its indestructible body gave her a great deal of trouble and trouble. The two of them fought for several days before the blue heart puppet's consciousness was obliterated and died. She panted heavily and looked at Suyu, who had appeared. Her eyes were wide open and full of annoyance. I've lived for so long, and I never thought I would be tricked by a junior. This time, her body was seriously injured and would need hundreds of years of isolation to recover. She had to admit that she had suffered a great loss. Moreover, she had not gained anything from this battle. She had just been engaged in a life-and-death battle for no reason. Suyu shrugged and said calmly, "You flatter me." In front of his chest, a bright oil lamp appeared, and the mature body of the sacred mortal body appeared. As soon as his figure appeared, it blotted out the sky and covered billions of galaxies. The figure grabbed the blue heart puppet from the Disan Mountain and put into Suyu's space storage device. The first ancestor stood up with difficulty, her messy hair unable to conceal her stubborn eyes. "You want to kill me? You're not strong enough." She wanted to reap the benefits? That would depend on the strength of this fisherman. Even though she was seriously injured, she was not someone Suyu could covet. Suyu walked over with his hands behind his back. At this moment, shouldn't you be humbling yourself and trying to mend the relationship between us? Suyu was strong, and she was weak. If you want to fight, let's fight. There's no need to feign civility. The first ancestor was an ancient and powerful being. How could she lower herself to a human who was not even an ancient saint? Suyu chuckled. "What an honest woman. I like it." However, Suyu's face was shrouded in the shadow of the giant figure, making him look merciless and ruthless. However, my rationality tells me that I need to eliminate the roots of the weed. He had already offended the first ancestor to the point where he wouldn't rest until one of them was dead. In the future, either he or the first ancestor would die. If the first ancestor was spared today, when the first ancestor recovered from his injuries tomorrow, Suyu would die. Hence, Suyu could not be merciful. Even though he did not hate the first ancestor too much, he did not hate the first ancestor. Then come. The first ancestor struggled to her feet. She gritted her teeth and vowed to fight to the death. "But before we fight, I want you to answer a question." "Speak." First ancestor said, "Can you predict the future, or have you calculated it?" "I'm saying that the sacred mountain son of heaven will interfere in the fight for the blue heart iron heart." Suyu's expression was calm as he replied, "Of course I will." Why would he assign the three ancient sages of the sacred puppet tribe to carry out a mission that even they were extremely suspicious of? That was because the mission was to send a message to the Stone Man Hall for the remnants of the Cloud Desolate Territory's human ancestor to appear. The Golem Hall would not underestimate this news. They would definitely inform the higher-ups immediately, and the Sacred Mountain would eventually learn of it. Their wills would descend upon this area, so it was normal for them to discover that the Blue Heart Iron Heart was being fought over. Moreover, with the Holy Mountain's past actions, they could not wait for the remaining experts of the 9-star civilizations to wither away. Only then could they ensure that the Holy Mountain's foundation would not be destroyed. Thus, it was to be expected that the Sacred Mountain Son of Heaven would secretly make a move to incite a war between the first ancestor and the Blue Heart Puppet. The human race is truly a wondrous race. First ancestor sighed with emotion. She had lived for nearly 10 eras, and in almost every era, she had witnessed a human almighty being who could shake time and space. Even further away, there was a 10,000 saints expert who was even more ancient than her, the Blue Heart Puppet's consciousness, Lu. More recently, there was the famous human ancestor who surpassed all the great figures of the human race. And this epoch was the most desolate era for the human race. Perhaps it was because of the emergence of world-shaking human powerhouses one after another that the sacred mountain son of heaven intentionally suppressed the luck of the human race. Up until now, there had not been a single powerful human almighty. But now, the first ancestor had changed his mind. It was not that the human almighty had not appeared, but that he had always been around. It was the first time in 10 eras that she had heard of someone who could even scheme against the sacred mountain son of heaven. "You flatter me," Suyu said lightly as he confronted the first ancestor from afar. A great battle was about to break out between the two sides. It was only a matter of who would make the first move. The little skeleton was also extremely nervous. A starving camel was still bigger than a horse, and no one could say for sure whether Suyu would come out on top, or the first ancestor would have the upper hand. Just as the two sides were facing each other, a sudden shadow of light streaked across the space and time, heading straight for them. It was the shadow of a giant ruler that spanned the heavens and the earth, and its entire body was in 9 colors. The moment it appeared, it shook the void, and the cloud desolate territory, which had already been scorched, turned into nothingness under its pressure. Under the shadow of the ruler, all things were reduced to nothingness. Suyu's pupil shrank, but he was not surprised. The Emperor's ruler. The clone of Emperor Xiaoyao had once held a replica of the Emperor's ruler, and Suyu had experienced its power. Compared to the replica, the real Emperor's ruler's power was more than 10 times greater. "I've been waiting for this strike for a long time." Since Suyu dared to attract the attention of the Saint Mountain's Emperor, how could he not have foreseen that the Saint Mountain's Emperor would leave behind a trick to kill them? In a flash, Suyu opened his mouth and spat out a mass of liquid that floated above his head. It was none other than Suyu's lifelong possessions, condensed into liquid. It was used to forge a new divine 9-dragon cauldron. Clang! Suyu pointed with one hand, and the mass of liquid flew up into the sky and quickly spread out, turning into a rippling water skin that shrouded the sky. The shadow of the ruler came slashing down, bombarding the water skin. "Idiot! That was an attack from Emperor Xiaoyao himself. How could you resist it?" The first ancestor murmured in despair, even losing the will to resist. If she was at her peak, she could still resist a little, but now that she was seriously injured, she could not muster much strength. So how could she face the attack head-on? However, to the first ancestor's surprise, the water skin actually absorbed the power of the ruler's shadow after shaking violently for a while. With that, the water skin became thicker. Suyu saw it and nodded to himself. He dared to attract the Saint Mountain's Emperor because he was confident that he could face their world-destroying attack. This liquid was his trump card. He had accidentally discovered that this liquid could contain anything, even attacks. However, he was not too sure if the Saint Mountain's Emperor's attack could be withstood. Now that he tried, it worked. "Although I really want to kill you, it seems that now is not the time," Suyu said regretfully. As soon as he finished speaking, the giant shadow carried Suyu and the little skeleton and rushed across the sky. He had to leave this place before Emperor Xiaoyao himself arrived. Chapter 3107. Swoosh! However, as soon as Suyu left, the first ancestor turned around and followed Suyu. "Split up. Otherwise, we will all die." Suyu frowned. If the two of them split up, the Emperor of Xiaoyao wouldn't be able to pay attention to 2 places, and one of them might be able to survive. However, if they stayed together, it would give Prince Xiaoyao a chance to kill them both. The first ancestor passed the little skeleton in a flash and said, "No, you have a treasure that can absorb Prince Xiaoyao's attack, and I have the movement technique of the 10,000 saints. If we work together, we will have a chance to survive. Otherwise, the chances are slim. The 10,000 saints are unfathomable, and Prince Xiaoyao is even more so. Don't expect to survive if we split up." Suyu looked helpless and sighed heavily. "All right, let's reconcile for now." Deal. In the face of life and death, they chose to cooperate. The first ancestor could not help but feel proud. No matter how Suyu planned, he had to adopt her plan because of the situation. However, what she did not notice was that Suyu's lips curled into a meaningful smile, which quickly disappeared before the first ancestor looked at him. The little skeleton sensed something. He stuck out his tongue and secretly said, "Young master, don't tell me you're plotting something again?" Suyu smiled without saying a word. Of course, he had a plan. How could someone as shrewd as Suyu not know that when facing Prince Xiaoyao, splitting up was useless? The best way was to unite with the first ancestor. Only then would there be a greater chance. However, if Suyu had been the one to propose a truce and unite against the common enemy, would the first ancestor have agreed? With her vigilance against Suyu, she would probably reject it immediately. Therefore, Suyu waited for her to propose it herself. This was the reason why Suyu had decisively left on his own, without the slightest bit of hesitation. Only then would the first ancestor be willing to stop the battle on his own. "Hold on to me." The first ancestor displayed her movement technique. Suyu and the little skeleton looked at each other and grinned. Each of them grabbed one of the first ancestor's arms. Swoosh! The first ancestor's movement technique was extraordinary. In an instant, they disappeared from the cloud-desolate territory and moved to another territory. However, Prince Xiaoyao's targeting did not disappear because of that. After 10 breaths, Suyu and the first ancestor were locked on by him again. A ruler shadow that transcended the stars came crashing down. Suyu once again took out the melted liquid used to refine the divine nine-dragon cauldron and absorbed the strike. After absorbing it, the melted liquid became even purer, becoming much clearer from its initial murky state. Seeing this, the first ancestor relaxed and continued to use his movement technique. After moving for the second time, Emperor Xiaoyao's gaze locked onto them again after 100 breaths. The third time, the fourth time, the fifth time. Every time they moved, it would take longer for Emperor Xiaoyao to find them again. After moving for 100 times, Emperor Xiaoyao spent a whole day to find them again. First ancestor gritted his teeth and continued to use his movement technique. In this way, both sides were practically competing in patience, and a long and drawn-out battle unfolded. 1 month later, the first ancestor was so exhausted that she had already forgotten how many times she had used her movement technique. She only knew that she was 100 times more exhausted than when she had been chasing after Suyu. And Xiaoyao, son of heaven, had not locked onto them for more than 10 days. From the looks of it, they had managed to shake it off. First ancestor finally lost all of his strength and collapsed to the ground in exhaustion. She had experienced the great battle with the Blue Heart puppet and the pursuit of Son of Heaven Xiaoyao. It could be said that she was extremely exhausted. Tired. That's good. Little skeleton, tie me up. Suyu and the little skeleton looked relaxed. Not only were they not tired, but they had also replenished their strength while they were escaping. The first ancestor opened her eyes with difficulty and showed a hint of self-mockery. As expected, she knew that she had fallen into Suyu's trap again. However, if you want to touch me, you'd better be cautious. A spark appeared between the first ancestor's brows, and a thunderbolt-shaped mark appeared out of thin air. Looking at the mark, Suyu felt his soul shiver, and it even showed signs of being forced out of his body. This was just the appearance of the mark. If it was activated, this is a secret technique passed down by the ancestors of the Saint Soul clan. Once it is activated, the enemy will be cursed by the bloodline of the soul for eternity. Every day, their souls will feel like they're being burned by the sun until they perish. If you don't believe me, you can try it. Of course, Suyu believed her. He was also a soul expert, and he had a deep understanding of the secret techniques of the soul. That mark was definitely dangerous. No, it was several times more dangerous than what she had said. The little skeleton understood and immediately said with a smile, "Ancestor, what are you thinking?" What the little master means is to tie a rope for you so that you won't be alone. We have to continue our journey, but you already have no strength left, right? The first ancestor laughed. Is that so? Of course, I am the mount of the Qing Emperor, after all. Lying is beneath me. The little skeleton patted his chest. Rumble. A thunderbolt fell without warning, landing right in front of the little skeleton's toes. The corners of Su Yu's mouth twitched. Even a heavenly law couldn't stand it. He felt that the little skeleton was lying. The little skeleton was embarrassed, and he couldn't help but raise his head and curse. Damn it, I didn't swear. Why did you strike me? The first ancestor flickered hair and said, Which one of you is tied to me? Him. Su Yu and the little skeleton pointed at each other at the same time. What a joke. Who would want to be tied to this ancient woman? What if she did something to him? Wouldn't he be turned into ashes? Su Yu glared at the little skeleton. You asked for it, so finish tying me up with tears. Really, the little skeleton's excuse wasn't very good. The first ancestor said lazily, I hope you can carry me on your back. Her beautiful eyes were fixed on Su Yu, and there was a meaningful look in her eyes. Su Yu waved his hand. Forget it. You and I are both 1,000-year-old foxes. Why are we talking about strange stories? We both know what we are up to, so there is no need to lie to each other. Su Yu knew what the first ancestor wanted to do. She wanted to do something to prevent Su Yu from attacking her when she was weak. We are not in a good situation now, so it is better not to kill without permission. Su Yu looked at the sky warily. The first ancestor agreed. Yes, it is better that way. The two hit it off, and the conflict was temporarily resolved. Su Yu looked around and only felt that the space here was a little dreamy, hazy, and unreal. Where's this? The nine-tailed Emperor realm, the first ancestor said lightly. Huh? Su Yu's heart skipped a beat. The nine-tailed emperor should be the first emperor he had come into contact with, but it was just a body. Seeing that there was no one around, and the first ancestor needed to rest, Su Yu found a safe place. He also needed to study the blue heart puppet that he had just obtained. This puppet was a peerless treasure. Chapter 3108. Seeing Su Yu fiddling with the puppet, the first ancestor's aloof eyes revealed a rare hint of jealousy. First ancestor had personally fought against this puppet, so he knew how powerful it was. If he could refine it for his own use, it would greatly enhance his combat strength. Seeing that Su Yu's attempts to refine the puppet had failed many times, the first ancestor chuckled. Don't waste your energy. This puppet isn't something you can refine. Really? Su Yu was unwilling to give up. After all, such a powerful treasure was right in front of him, yet he couldn't use it. The first ancestor sized up the blue heart puppet and said, This is forged using the 10,000 Holies body of the Toba sect as the main material. Unless your soul force is strong enough to control the 10,000 Holies body, you won't be able to do so. Su Yu had seen many doctrine artifacts, so he was enlightened by her words. The reason why he was unable to refine it was due to the myriad sage body. Su Yu was deeply aware of how powerful the All-Saint body was. A strong All-Saint who had died for several eras could ruthlessly plot against the Puppet Saint clan, deceiving them into refining his body for him. Su Yu had not even reached the level of an ancient saint. It was unrealistic for him to dream of occupying the All-Saint's body. In the end, it was all because his cultivation was still too low. It seemed like he would have to find a way to push for a breakthrough to ancient sage as soon as possible. If you hand it over to me, I can exempt you from the crime of secretly learning our soul-sacred race's ancestral technique. From then on, no one will be able to kill you. First ancestor suggested. Su Yu chuckled. Your soul saint clan is incompetent, yet you can't bear to see someone else learn the complete soul ancestral technique. First ancestor openly admitted, You can say that. What we can't learn, we can't let others learn. The corners of Su Yu's mouth twitched. He continued to study the blue heart puppet and said, Dream on. First ancestor's expression was tranquil. If you don't give us an explanation, we won't let this matter rest. Su Yu shrugged his shoulders and focused on studying the blue heart puppet. He tried to use his own soul to pass through the blue heart iron's cover and touch the all-sage's body within. But as soon as he touched it, his soul was fine, but he felt a searing pain in his chest. What's going on? Su Yu was secretly surprised. He immediately retrieved his soul and tore open his chest. An image of a hideous demon had appeared on his chest. First ancestor looked over and recognized him immediately. He revealed a gloating expression. "Oh, you were cursed by the heaven-covering clan? You're in big trouble. As far as I know, the curse of the Sky Cover clan is extremely powerful. Even I might not be able to break free from the curse." This curse was indeed given to him by Guy Tion Mo before he died. However, his original intention was not to kill Su Yu, but to leave his mark on Su Yu's body so that his people could find Su Yu and take revenge for him. Coincidentally, the experts of the Gaetian clan found Su Yu, but they didn't kill him to avenge him. Instead, he said that there were no eternal enemies, only eternal interests. Not only did he not kill him, but because he recognized Su Yu's strength, he invited him to join him in killing a severely injured All-Saint strong man who had escaped from the grave of the Ultimate Emperor. If Guy Tion and Mo knew about this, he would definitely be very disappointed. However, what Su Yu was curious about was why touching the All-Saint's body would trigger the curse on him. With some doubts, Su Yu once again touched the All-Saint's body with his soul. As a result, the curse in his chest, which had calmed down with great difficulty, erupted again. Both attempts yielded the same result, and a bold idea came to Su Yu's mind. Could it be that this All-Saint strong man had also been cursed by the Gaetian clan when he was alive? He suddenly remembered that when the experts of the Gaetian clan found him, they once said that the ancestors of the Gaetian clan had once used the ancestral technique on a stone man of the All-Saint strong man, causing the All-Saint strong man to change his temperament and start a massacre. In the end, it was Prince Xiaoyao who attacked and killed him. Could it be that the All-Saint strong man killed by the Gaetian clan was the All-Saint's body in the Blue Heart puppet? However, the All-Saint strong man in the Blue Heart puppet seemed to be from the human race, and his name was Tuoba Lu, right? Thinking of this, Su Yu asked, "First ancestor, is Tuoba Lu really the All-Saint of our human race?" The first ancestor was surprised that Su Yu would ask this question, but she didn't think it was a secret, so she didn't put up her guard. She said lightly, "He used to be." "What do you mean?" The first ancestor said, "He used to be a strong man of your human race. He cultivated to the peak of the great saint realm and achieved the state of half a step to all saint, but he was never able to take that step. In the end, he became a disciple of the stone man and accepted the baptism of the holy mountain. He changed from a human to a stone man, and with the help of Prince Xiaoyao, he finally broke through the shackles and became an all-saint strong man." Su Yu suddenly understood. This made sense. He was deep in thought. He and the all-saint body had the same curse. So, could he control the Blue Heart puppet through the curse? After cultivating the many ancestral techniques on the ultimate divine monument, Su Yu gradually understood that all ancestral techniques were derived from later generations. Su Yu also wanted to learn how to create his own techniques, and not just learn from the predecessors. He sat cross-legged, his fingers incessantly drawing one remnant mark after another in the air, hoping to create a technique that could connect the two ancestral techniques. The first ancestor was recuperating. She glanced at Su Yu and noticed his strange movements. At first, she didn't care, but as she watched, her beautiful eyes slowly condensed into a hint of surprise. At first glance, the remnant mark that Su Yu displayed was neither fish nor fowl. It had the characteristics of this clan's ancestral technique and the advantages of another ancestral technique. It was like a hodgepodge, messy and messy. But as Su Yu displayed it again and again, the remnant mark became more and more smooth and clear. Moreover, it gradually got rid of the traces of the ancestral techniques of other clans, becoming a strange and brand new ancestral technique. The first ancestor was dumbfounded, and a thought that even she didn't quite believe popped up in her mind. Was Su Yu creating an ancestral technique? That was impossible, wasn't it? Any ancestral technique was the result of a clan's tempering thousands of times, and it was difficult to take shape without dozens or hundreds of eras. Su Yu, relying on the strength of a single person, created an unprecedented ancestral technique in just 2 hours, not to mention that it was unbelievable to hear it. Even seeing it with her own eyes was unbelievable. After another 2 hours, the ancestral technique was completely formed. Su Yu pointed down, and a bright and dazzling ancestral technique flashed around his body. He had integrated thousands of ancestral techniques and had already mastered them. It wasn't difficult to create the ancestral technique that he wanted by drawing on the strengths of each clan. The premise was that this ancestral technique was only at the lowest level, and its power was very limited. If the level was higher, then Su Yu's comprehension wouldn't be able to achieve it. He pointed his finger between his eyebrows, drawing out a long remnant mark, and then pointed at the blue heart puppet's forehead. A remnant mark connected Su Yu and the blue heart puppet. The image of an evil ghost appeared on the chests of both Su Yu and the blue heart puppet. However, Su Yu's color was darker, and the blue heart puppet's was very light. After all, Su Yu had just been cursed, but the blue heart puppet had been around for many years. Chapter 3109. Through the two curses of the same origin, Su Yu tried to control the blue heart puppet. Rise! Su Yu bellowed. He used his mind to control the curse on the other party, and then control the puppet's body. However, the result disappointed Su Yu. The blue heart puppet did not move at all. The first ancestor secretly heaved a sigh of relief. To be honest, she was shocked to see Su Yu create the ancestral technique himself. She was afraid that Su Yu could really control the blue heart puppet. If that was the case, they would be in big trouble. Fortunately, it was just a false alarm. She curled her lips slightly, retracted her mind, and seized the time to recover. She closed her eyes and said softly, "Don't dream about unrealistic things. You can't use that puppet." Su Yu sighed heavily, as if he had resigned himself to his fate. The blue heart puppet put away the space storage device. However, what the first ancestor did not notice was that when Su Yu grabbed the blue heart puppet's shoulder, the puppet's palm also quietly grabbed it. Su Yu's eyes flashed, and he calmly took back the blue heart puppet. How could the ancestral technique that he had specially created be a waste of effort? The answer was, of course, success. He was just confusing the first ancestor so that she would not be on guard. When the opportunity was ripe, he would give her a pleasant surprise. The two of them rested on the spot. 2 hours later, they had almost recovered and continued on their way. A few days later, they arrived at the central area of the nine-tailed Emperor realm. During this time, Xiaoyao, son of heaven, never locked onto them again. "We may have successfully shaken him off," the first ancestor said with certainty. No matter how powerful Xiaoyao, son of heaven, was, there was a limit to how many targets he could lock onto. "I need to find a place to recuperate." The first ancestor was exhausted. The blue heart puppet had seriously injured him, and after a long period of fleeing, his injuries had gradually worsened. If he did not receive treatment in time, the consequences would be unpredictable. Su Yu frowned and looked around. "Are you sure we have really shaken off Xiaoyao, son of heaven?" Based on his many experiences fighting with the clone of Xiaoyao, son of heaven, he knew that this person was cunning and extremely sinister. How could he be so easily shaken off? The first ancestor was a little too naive. "It's better to continue on our way. Don't stop," Su Yu said. "It's only safe if he doesn't lock onto us for at least a year." "A year?" The first ancestor couldn't help but laugh out of anger. "Do you know how much my year-long journey takes out of my body?" It had only been a month or so, but she already felt that her body had reached its limit, and she had no choice but to find a place to recuperate. If she were to really travel for a year, even her 10,000 sages body would find it hard to endure. Without any explanation, the first patriarch descended into an ordinary small city, found a secret chamber with dense heavenly Tao, Lord Qi, and immediately began to meditate. Su Yu sighed. Since that was the case, they could only part ways. "Little skeleton, let's go." He had tried to persuade the first ancestor, but the first ancestor didn't believe him. Although Little Skeleton wasn't as fast as the first patriarch, he was at least 70% as fast as the first patriarch. All right, the Little Skeleton immediately transformed into a lion and set off. Time ticked by. After a whole month, they were about to pass through the entire nine-tailed Emperor realm. The border was right in front of them. In another half a day's journey, they would be able to leave the nine-tailed Emperor's realm completely. "Continue," Su Yu urged the Little Skeleton, who was so tired that it wanted to rest. to leave as soon as possible. However, the little skeleton suddenly scratched the ground with all four limbs and said uneasily, "Little master, do you feel that?" Suyu looked around, and his pupils shrank abruptly. At the border, there was a faintly discernible mass of gray smoke. It was rolling in from the outside indiscriminately. Within the smoke, it was filled with densely packed stone men. They were holding all kinds of Taoist artifacts in their hands, almost digging 3 feet into the ground in search. Suyu's expression changed, and he immediately moved to the other side of the border. The result was the same. Everywhere he looked, there were majestic stone men, and their numbers were indescribable. The little skeleton sucked in a breath of cold air. Damn it, did Xiaoyao, son of heaven, summon all the descendants of the emperor? This is almost like the scene when the human ancestors attacked the holy mountain back then. Xiaoyao, son of heaven, made such a big fuss. Firstly, the blue heart puppet and the blue heart iron heart were of great use to them. Secondly, the more important reason was Suyu. Xiaoyao, son of heaven, had probably sensed Suyu's presence. His desire to kill Suyu had existed for a long time. Now that he had finally found Suyu, how could he let him go? I told you, Xiaoyao, son of heaven, wouldn't give up so easily. Suyu's eyes darkened. The other party didn't give up on tracking them at all, but deliberately gave them the wrong impression to lower their guard and stay in the nine-tailed emperor's realm. This gave him the opportunity to surround the entire emperor's realm. Now, every corner of the border was filled with the army of stone men, and they were shrinking rapidly as they swarmed inwards. Suyu had no choice but to retreat, his heart sinking. The little skeleton grumbled, "It's all that old woman's fault." If she had listened to the young master and continued on their way, she might have taken us away from the nine-tailed emperor's realm and escaped the encirclement. Great, now we're completely surrounded. Suyu frowned. Now is not the time to complain. It was better to meet up with the first ancestor as soon as possible. A month later, Suyu returned to the small city. The news from the border flew back to the city as if it had grown wings. Just as he returned, the first ancestor sensed his presence. He immediately flashed over and scolded, "Where have you all been? Why are you only back now? Do you know that something big has happened?" The little skeleton said impatiently, "Did Prince Xiaoyao send the stone men to surround the nine-tailed emperor's realm?" You know? The first ancestor frowned. The little skeleton almost roared. "You still have the cheek to say that. We were already at the border, but we witnessed it with our own eyes." What? The first ancestor was shocked. Suyu and the others had already been to the border. She immediately suppressed her anger and looked a little ashamed. "I was careless. I didn't expect Prince Xiaoyao to be so impatient." The little skeleton's nostrils flared. "Are you satisfied now? We're like turtles in a jar." Suyu waved his hand and gestured for the little skeleton to shut up. "The most important thing now is not to determine who is responsible, but to figure out how to escape from their encirclement," Suyu said. The first ancestor tidied her hair around her ears. She was extremely remorseful, and her tone became much more polite. "Sacred Body Su, do you have any wise ideas?" After several encounters with Suyu, and after this lesson, she was obviously much more polite to Suyu. She reluctantly regarded him as an equal. Suyu muttered, "They've dug 3 feet into the ground to search. The process is very slow, and they won't find this place in a short time. However, because of this, it may be difficult to hide from them no matter how we try to deceive them," Suyu said hesitantly. In this regard, the first ancestor deeply agreed. Prince Xiaoyao had paid a huge price to deploy such a large number of stonemen here. He would never let them get away so easily. Chapter 31:10. The first ancestor continued to listen patiently and said, "And then, Suyu said slowly, maybe we could try to break out of the encirclement." The current encirclement meant that the search teams were all scattered in the vast encirclement. When the encirclement shrank, there would be more and more soldiers everywhere. Now was the best time to break out of the encirclement. Break out of the encirclement? The first ancestor was skeptical. "Since you arrived at the encirclement a month ago, why didn't you break out?" Suyu said calmly, "Because we share the same fate. I couldn't bear to see you alone, so I came back to look for you. In fact, was there a greater danger outside the encirclement? So you couldn't predict it. Without someone like the first ancestor as a scapegoat. No, it was too risky to travel with such an expert. Do you think I'll believe you? The first ancestor was both annoyed and amused. Did Suyu really think she was a young girl? In this world, Suyu was the one who wanted her dead the most. As long as she died, not only would he be able to get rid of his worries, but he would also be able to obtain the blue heart iron in her body. You don't believe me? Same here. Suyu shrugged. There's no time to lose. Let's move immediately. All right. The two of them did not stop. This time, with the first ancestor's movement technique, it only took them half a month to reach the edge of the nine-tailed heavenly realm from the center. As Suyu expected, because of the long search line, their search was very slow. 1 or 2 months passed, and they did not make much progress. The two of them hid in the bushes and concealed their auras, like stone men. The distance between each stone man is about a mile. It will be very difficult for us to break out without alerting anyone, the first ancestor said, squinting her eyes. The stone men's senses were very sensitive, especially when many of them were together. They could even form a special aura. Even if a fly flew between them, they would be quickly discovered, not to mention 2 living people. Suyu agreed. That's why I said to break out of the encirclement, not to hide. If he could hide alone, Suyu would have escaped long ago. Why would he go back to meet up with the first ancestor? The two of them looked at each other and seemed to see the hidden meaning in each other's eyes. They said in unison, "You're not cheating, are you?" After saying that, Suyu and the first ancestor were stunned. First ancestor couldn't help but mock himself. It's hard to imagine that I'm actually on par with a 200-year-old midget. Her astuteness and cunning came from the accumulation of almost 10 epochs. As for Suyu, he was merely 200 years old, yet he had an intelligence that was comparable to hers. It was unbearable. However, it seems like you're the one who likes to play tricks, aren't you? The first ancestor stared at Suyu, her beautiful eyes narrowing into slits. All along, Suyu had been scheming against her. On the other hand, she, an ancestor, had disdained scheming against a mere human. Suyu had a solemn look on his face. I promise that I will definitely not plot against you. It's more important for us to escape now, so we should cooperate sincerely, Suyu said. The first ancestor rolled his eyes at Suyu. It's good that you know that. I'm warning you, don't be petty. Definitely. Suyu retracted his gaze and looked at the stone man in front of him who was slowly searching for him. He took a light breath. When the time came, the first ancestor suddenly launched an attack. With a flick of her finger, a whirlwind of the 10,000 saints level rose from the ground, sweeping away all the stone men within 10,000 miles in front of her. Since they could not escape by stealth, they might as well break through the encirclement openly. Let's go. The first ancestor grabbed Suyu, and the two of them instantly rushed out of the border of the nine-tailed emperor's realm and reached the outside. What they saw was a stretch of yellow sand and an incomparably empty sky. Just as they were about to break free, an extremely powerful red light suddenly shot out from the yellow sand. Do it, the first ancestor scolded. Suyu immediately used the mass of liquid and absorbed the red light until there was not a trace left. When they fixed their eyes on it, their pupils shrank as they discovered that under the yellow sand, there were tens of thousands of emerald green eyes with only a corner of them showing. Each eye was filled with emerald green light. How could Suyu be unfamiliar with these things? They were all replicas of the nine-tailed emperor's eyes, and the nine-tailed emperor's eyes could kill all living creatures. Although the red beams of light in these replicas were far less powerful than the real nine-tailed emperor's eyes, their power was not to be underestimated. If they were hit, even the strong men of the 10,000 saints would suffer. With so many replicas, if a large area was hit, even the strong men of the 10,000 saints would die. The nine-tailed emperor's heaven-destroying artifact of the past. The first ancestor cried out in horror. The so-called heaven-destroying artifact was a doctrine artifact that every emperor of the Holy Mountain possessed, and there were often countless of them. They had been nurtured by the emperors for countless years, and their power had increased day by day. What the first ancestor did not expect was that Emperor Xiaoyao had taken out the nine-tailed emperor's heaven-destroying artifact to deal with them. It should be known that if the heaven-destroying artifact was not used personally, it would damage its essence every time it was used. After this use, most of it would probably be scrapped. For the sake of the two of them, he did not hesitate to destroy the heaven-destroying artifact. In the blink of an eye, the heaven-destroying artifact flickered with red light, and beams of blood-red light crisscrossed as they shot towards them, leaving them with no means of evading. So you did not dare to hesitate. He immediately waved the liquid and flattened it into a round cake, shielding the two of them. Swoosh! Swoosh! The thin layer of transparent liquid, round cake, in front of them kept sinking as if it was about to be penetrated by the red light beams. However, every single one of them was blocked by the heaven-destroying artifact. Just like that, after the red light beams that filled the sky were extinguished, the first ancestor heaved a long sigh of relief. He immediately grabbed Su Yu and leaped out of the yellow desert in front of them. With the first ancestor's body movement technique, he could travel through billions of mountains and rivers in an instant. However, the nearby stone men finally reacted. They immediately sent out a signal to inform Emperor Xiaoyao, who was in the unseen world. Their existence was not to kill the two of them, but to find them and inform Emperor Xiaoyao immediately. The first ancestor looked indifferent. He said thoughtfully, "Human, it's time for us to part ways." As his voice trailed off, he loosened his grip and threw Su Yu behind him. At the same time, he used his ultimate body movement technique and disappeared without a trace. At the critical moment, she left Su Yu behind and let him divert Emperor Xiaoyao's attention while she escaped calmly. The little skeleton was furious. "Aya, this be asterisk-starred. She is scheming against us." She had just confidently said that it was Su Yu who had been scheming against her. In the end, as soon as she turned around, she started to scheme against Su Yu. Moreover, it was at such a critical moment. Those stone men could not lock onto the first ancestor, but they could lock on to Su Yu and report his location in time. Su Yu chuckled. "It's not certain who is scheming against whom." "What?" The little skeleton's eyes widened. "You have been dumped, and you still want to flatter yourself?" Chapter 3111. It looked around and saw the stone men surrounding them. It seemed that they had been targeted, and Prince Xiaoyao had been informed. If nothing went wrong, Prince Xiaoyao's search would soon be in this area. By then, they would have to go through a long escape. "Get ready," Su Yu said in a low voice. The little skeleton had no idea what Su Yu was going to do, but it was ready to use its body movement. Right at this moment, the first ancestor, who had gone far away, flew back. Moreover, she was wounded all over, and several of her wounds were fatal. It seemed that she was wounded by the heaven-destroying artifact. "No way. There's an ambush outside." The little skeleton suddenly realized. It couldn't help but shiver. This Prince Xiaoyao is too cunning. He deliberately made people think that the heaven-destroying artifact after the stone men was the last ambush. However, in fact, the first two were used to confuse them, and the real killing weapon was left at the end. Judging from the first ancestor's injuries, the heaven-destroying artifact waiting for her was much more than expected. "Let's go," Su Yu yelled. The little skeleton roared. "Ha ha ha, old woman, you tricked us. You deserve to be ambushed." Its four limbs kicked off, and it quickly tore through the air, flying in the opposite direction of where the first ancestor had come from. The two passed by each other in the air. Su Yu looked forward calmly as if he had everything planned out. "You tricked me again." The first ancestor spat out a mouthful of blood with difficulty as she watched Su Yu and the little skeleton fly away. She finally understood why Su Yu didn't struggle after being left behind. Instead, he waited quietly in the same place. Because he had calculated that there must be another ambush outside. He didn't tell her, but waited for her to go there and trigger the ambush. Now, the heaven-destroying artifact there had been used once, so its power had been greatly reduced, or it had been directly destroyed. The threat would be reduced a lot. In addition, Su Yu had the mysterious liquid, so he wouldn't be hurt. Most importantly, she was seriously injured and couldn't escape. She could only stay and be targeted by Prince Xiaoyao, so Suyu could escape. The first ancestor was depressed to find that she couldn't beat a 200-year-old boy. Seeing Su Yu's back disappear from her line of sight, she understood that if she did not have any way to salvage the situation, she might really be buried with him. She instantly weighed the pros and cons in her mind and finally made up her mind. She gritted her teeth and said, "You're lucky." Her hands formed a seal, and a colorful butterfly-shaped soul flew out from between her eyebrows. "Go." She opened her mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood, which landed on the colorful butterfly soul. With the drop of blood in its mouth, the colorful butterfly instantly traversed the space and caught up with Suyu. It shot towards Suyu's back with lightning speed. Suyu sensed that something was amiss and immediately maneuvered the little skeleton to dodge to the side in time. However, just as Suyu was dodging, the colorful butterfly suddenly flapped its wings and increased its speed by 100 times. With a whooshing sound, the butterfly entered Suyu's heart. A heart-wrenching pain came, and it was getting more and more intense, as if there was a raging flame burning in his heart. At the same time, the first ancestor's voice came from his soul. "I'm sorry, this is the only way." The first ancestor's soul voice said, "This is one of the most powerful secret arts of the sacred soul tribe, soul fusion. Now, your soul and my soul are one. If my soul is injured or destroyed, your soul will suffer the same damage or die." What? Suyu's eyes darkened. He hated secret arts that were similar to curses the most. They easily linked the lives of both parties together, and they were bound together for good or bad. He looked at the damaged heaven-destroying artifact not far in front of him, and then looked at the vast sky in front of him. He could only grit his teeth and say, "Go back. That damned old woman." Even Suyu couldn't help but be annoyed. In the end, he had underestimated the strong men of the All Saints. They had endless tricks, and he would be tricked if he was not careful. The little skeleton had to turn around and go back. Soon, it returned to the encirclement and found the seriously injured first ancestor on the ground. Crack! Without saying anything, Suyu pulled out the absolute heaven sword and placed it on her neck. He said fiercely, "Don't tell me you can't break this secret art." The first ancestor coughed up blood, but there was a smile on her face. What do you think? At this moment, she could still smile? Moreover, she was smiling proudly, as if she had tricked him as well. She was an old monster who had lived for nearly 10 eras, and she had tricked a junior. What was there to be proud of? Suyu clenched the absolute heaven sword. He really wanted to kill this woman with a sword. Since they met, she had always been the symbol of trouble. From the Soul Saint tribe, she had chased them all the way to the Tsangtian Mountain, then out of the Tsangtian Mountain, and finally caused them to be stranded in the territory of the Nine-Tailed Emperor. Now, she had even taken the liberty to link their souls together. However, as the first ancestor said, their souls were now one. Suyu hurting her was equivalent to hurting himself. "Ah!" Suyu roared at the sky, grabbed her, and threw her on the back of the little skeleton. He then drove the little skeleton to continue to rush out of the encirclement. However, the encirclement of the stone men had closed again. Moreover, an incomparably powerful wall was sweeping over from the periphery. That was the sense of the Xiaoyao Emperor, who was sweeping in from the outside. If they rushed out now, they would be discovered in an instant, and then they would be locked down. "It's over, we're dead." The little skeleton was trembling. Suyu gritted his teeth, urged the little skeleton to turn around, and fled frantically towards the interior of the Nine-Tailed Emperor. They fled for 10 days straight, and arrived at the center of the Nine-Tailed Emperor's territory. There were many forces here, and it was exceptionally prosperous. However, no matter how prosperous it was, those forces did not dare to fight against the Xiaoyao Emperor. No one could help them. The powerful will behind them did not go far away because of their escape. In a day at most, they would be swept by it, and then they would be completely locked down. Suyu's mind was racing, but ideas flashed through his mind one by one, and they were all rejected. The scanning of the Xiaoyao Emperor could not be deceived by ordinary concealment techniques. While he was deep in thought, the first ancestor, who had recovered slightly, said hesitantly, "The scanning of the Xiaoyao Emperor mainly targets the soul. Unless we change our soul, no disguise will work." Su Yu's heart sank even more. Changing the soul was easier said than done. The soul was the origin of life, so how could it be changed arbitrarily? He had mastered the complete soul ancestral technique, but he had never understood the secret technique of changing the soul. "Don't waste your breath," Su Yu said bluntly. It was all this old woman's fault that he was in such a predicament. The first ancestor hesitated even more. His eyes evaded, and his expression became very strange. "Actually, the soul between you and me can be changed, at least in a short period of time, and we can deceive the Xiaoyao Emperor." "Huh?" Su Yu stopped abruptly, taken aback. However, when he saw the strange expression on the first ancestor's face, he knew that this was not a good idea. Chapter 31:12. Su Yu was slightly hesitant. "The soul's between you and me? What do you mean?" His expression was not very good, because his intuition told him that what first ancestor said was definitely a rather difficult solution. Even the first ancestor, who was at the pinnacle of the world, was avoiding Su Yu's questioning gaze and hesitating to speak. "If you have something to say, just say it. We don't have much time." Su Yu furrowed his brows. First ancestor was hesitant. In the end, she pursed her red lips and said softly, "Yes, the fusion of souls. Soul fusion? Can you explain it clearly?" Su Yu was a little impatient. Wasn't the so-called fusion of souls just some sort of spiritual resonance? How would this change the soul? "It means that," first ancestor said with difficulty. She couldn't open her mouth to explain, so she gritted her teeth and said, "Why are you asking so many questions? Just do as I say." Electric waves flickered in his eyes, and a trembling, substantial soul pierced into the depths of Su Yu's soul. Just how powerful was the first ancestor's soul? It had been tempered for close to 10 great years. There weren't many creatures in the world that could contend against it. Su Yu's soul was immediately shaken by the trembling soul. His entire soul trembled violently, uncontrollably, and it quickly left his body. Not long after, his soul left his body. Before Su Yu could react, the first ancestor's clear voice sounded in his ears. "I didn't expect that I would end up marrying a human like you." Looking over, the first ancestor was slowly taking off his clothes. "What do you mean by soul fusion?" Su Yu finally understood what soul fusion meant. That was the union of two souls between a man and a woman. First ancestor took off his clothes and said, "My soul is in your body. If we fuse, our souls can temporarily fuse into one and become a new soul. No matter how strong Xiao Yao, son of heaven, is, it would be hard for him to differentiate between the two of us after we fused." This was the so-called method to temporarily change souls between them. Su Yu turned around without hesitation and said, "I'm sorry, but I can't comply." It was impossible for him to marry a woman who was his enemy not long ago, a woman who had harmed him to such an extent. The little skeleton's lungs were about to explode. "Old woman, do you want to feed the young cow with old grass? You could be little master's ancestor." "No, you're even older than his ancestors." The human ancestor from the last era was still a junior in front of the first ancestor of the soul sacred race. "Do you think that I would do such a thing if I had a choice?" The first ancestor retorted, "Do you know how much power I'll lose after our souls merge?" She raised a finger. "An entire era's worth of souls." Little skeleton was dumbfounded. How enormous would the soul of an era be? As for age, is that really important? 200 years old and 10 epochs old monsters. What's the difference? First ancestor said calmly. "Moreover, I have never had any soul or physical interaction with anyone in my life. In the words of you humans, it's a virgin." The little skeleton opened its mouth wide and looked at Su Yu. It was extremely tempted. "Master, why don't you just give in? It sounds like it's very hard to reject. Although she's an old woman, she's still a virgin for 10 eras. The first ancestor was probably the oldest in the entire 9-star civilization. Get lost." So you kicked him, then returned to his own body. This kind of matter no matter how great the benefits were, could not be compromised. However, just as he was about to leave, a powerful soul strength pulled his soul out again. Looking back, he saw that the first ancestor had taken off all his clothes, leaving only a fluorescent glow in front of his chest. "I can't die." The first ancestor looked up at the sky, her eyes resolute. "He's coming. There's no time left." As she spoke, she walked towards Suyu. Suyu kept stepping back, saying, "Your soul hasn't even left your body. How can you talk about merging?" The first ancestor touched his cheek. "Didn't anyone tell you that my body has been destroyed for a long time? Even the Holy Mountain's emperors had to constantly destroy the world's civilizations to maintain their survival, let alone ordinary creatures. The Soul Saint tribe valued the soul more than the physical cultivation. The first ancestor's body had decayed several years ago, leaving only her soul." "Soul body?" Suyu and Little Skeleton were both shocked. From the beginning to the end, the first ancestor had appeared in front of people with her soul. What if he were seriously injured and vomited blood? Little Skeleton's eyes widened. The first ancestor said calmly, "When the soul is extremely powerful, the body is just a dispensable shell." Her soul was so powerful that she didn't need the protection of her body. She had fought a great battle with the blue heart puppet before. "There are no more questions, right?" The first ancestor walked up and looked at Suyu, who was still retreating. With a wave of his hand, a soul barrier blocked Suyu's surroundings. Little Skeleton, who was separated from the barrier, changed his expression. "First ancestor, you won't get the little master's heart if you do that." The first ancestor said calmly, "What do I want his heart for? My soul is enough." Little Skeleton sighed helplessly. "Master, just give in." The first ancestor frowned. "You talk too much." With a wave of his hand, a soul light flew out and enveloped Little Skeleton. Suddenly, Little Skeleton's eyes were blocked. "Ah, give me back my eyes, give me back my light, give me back." Woo-woo. In the end, Little Skeleton couldn't even speak, and his ears couldn't hear anything. He fell into darkness. Inside the barrier, Suyu's face was stiff. "Don't come over." He put his palms together and performed secret soul techniques. However, all secret techniques were useless in front of the world's #1 soul expert. "Don't waste your energy." The first ancestor walked over and blew a breath of air. A powerful force blew Suyu to the ground. If he had a body, Suyu could still perform all kinds of secret techniques and compete with the first ancestor. In particular, he could control the blue heart puppet through curses. But now he only had his soul. Facing the first ancestor, he couldn't resist at all. Then, the first ancestor's soul squatted down and pressed on Suyu's body to forcefully integrate with him. Suyu was shocked and angry. He was about to push her away when a powerful gaze swept over him. It was Prince Xiaoyao. The first ancestor's expression changed. Quick! She immediately sat on Suyu's body and prepared to integrate with him. Suyu's expression changed again and again. He growled in a low voice, "Old woman, it's all your fault, and you still want to ride on me? I'll do it." He climbed up, turned over, and pressed the first ancestor under him. Then, with a loud roar, the two of them joined together. In an indescribable entanglement, the soul of Prince Xiaoyao unexpectedly swept over. When it fell on them, it obviously paused. But a moment later, it left again. Suyu and the first ancestor had a tacit understanding and didn't move. Sure enough, not long after, the gaze that had left came back. Chapter 31:13. His gaze locked onto the fused souls of Suyu and the first ancestor, and he was obviously suspicious. Because the two of them seemed to have met before, especially Suyu's soul, Xiaoyao, son of heaven, had a deep impression of it. However, Suyu's soul had fused with the first ancestors, and he had long since changed beyond recognition. Emperor Xiaoyao's gaze was fixed on him for 3 breaths before it quickly dissipated. After confirming that he had left, Suyu and the first ancestors' souls finally separated. Both of them looked at each other with complicated emotions. Although it was only a fusion of souls, the fusion between a man and a woman had already happened. They had already consummated their marriage. Suyu stared at him deeply. His anger had already dissipated completely, and what was left was only a complicated feeling. Ever since he had gotten together with Siener, Suyu had never thought that he would one day have a relationship with another woman. This was a betrayal to Sien. Do you know what you have done? Suyu's expression was gloomy. At this moment, he could no longer distinguish what he was thinking in his heart. Was it rage and killing intent, or was it helplessly lenient? If it wasn't because he had no other choice, he believed that the first ancestor wouldn't give himself to him, much less force him. But reality had already happened. He wanted to forgive the first patriarch, but it was hard for him to convince himself otherwise. First ancestor retracted his gaze and wore his clothes. He said indifferently, "What am I doing? In the words of your human race, aren't you the one who's doing me?" Suyu, who had wanted to denounce her, was immediately rendered speechless. It didn't take long for the first ancestor to put on his clothes, and it was like nothing had happened between him and Xia Qingchen. He said, "Between us, you're the one who's taking advantage, and I'm the one who's suffering. The one with resentment should be me. If you don't believe me, take a look at your own soul." First ancestor bit her lips, a look of reluctance on her face. Suyu was so angry that he laughed. He didn't even listen to the second half of what he had said. He said coldly, "Are you saying that I'm the one who forced everything to be loud?" Of course, as he spoke, Suyu quickly returned to his own body. He wasn't a match for the first ancestor at all. However, just as his soul returned to his body, something unexpected happened. Suyu suddenly realized that there was a strong sense of rejection between himself and his body. No, to be more precise, his body was unable to contain his soul. Upon closer inspection, he discovered that his soul force was more than 100 times stronger than before. When his soul left his body once again, Suyu discovered, to his surprise, that his soul body was emitting golden spots. If he recalled correctly, only the souls of 10,000 saint experts would have golden spots on them. When his entire soul body turned golden, it would be the day he became a myriad saint. The strength of Suyu's soul at the moment was comparable to that of a prospective all-saint. The extent to which his soul was jumping was probably unprecedented in this world. At this time, first ancestor's faint voice sounded. Soul union is the supreme secret technique of our sacred soul tribe. Only ancestor can learn it. This technique can only be used once in a person's life. Its effect is that when you mate with a partner whose soul is stronger than your own, you'll be able to absorb the other party's soul energy and eventually break through the shackles of the soul, reaching the ultimate stage of the soul. The ultimate stage of the soul? Suyu knew that the absolute beginning force would be cultivated to the end of the 10,000 types of energy. Could it be that the final stage of the soul that the first ancestor mentioned was actually the absolute beginning force? However, from his tone, it didn't seem like it. My one and only soul union was originally meant for a king of heaven's road to obtain the soul energy that I wanted from him, and then break through the shackles. It's a pity that it's all gone to waste. Suyu finally understood why his soul had skyrocketed. The function of soul union was to balance the strength of the two fused souls. It was to take the strong and make up for the weak. Originally, first ancestor wanted to mate with a stronger being to get the opportunity to skyrocket her soul, but the result was the opposite. She had no choice but to mate with Suyu, and her soul energy was seriously diverted to Suyu. By rough estimation, at least an era's worth of soul energy had been distributed to Suyu. That was why Suyu's soul had leaped to the level of a prospective great saint. First ancestor looked up at the sky. She had already sensed that Prince Xiaoyao's gaze had disappeared from the nine-tailed emperor's realm. Moreover, the stone men that surrounded and searched nearby had also disappeared, which meant that Prince Xiaoyao had completely given up on searching for them. Human, our encounter ends here. I never want to meet you again in my life. After the first ancestor finished speaking, she turned into a phantom and disappeared from Suyu's sight, leaving only the lingering fragrance in the air. Suyu felt a sense of helplessness. Why did First Ancestor feel that he would be the one to suffer? Crack. With her departure, the secret soul technique that she had cast lost its effect one after another. Not only did the space barrier disappear, but even the little skeleton's perception blockade was broken. The little skeleton immediately saw Suyu and hurriedly shouted, "Little master, have you finished your business?" It wagged its tail and blinked its eyes curiously, as if it was listening to some particularly interesting news. Suyu ignored it and was familiarizing himself with his brand-new soul in case he couldn't even return to his body. "Little master, say something." The little skeleton was extremely unwilling to give up, and with an evil smile, he squinted his eyes and said, "Was the taste of the world's best place. How about sharing it with your dearest spiritual pet?" Suyu squinted at him. "Do you really want to know?" The little skeleton hurriedly nodded and swallowed his saliva. "Of course. Okay, then I'll tell you." Suyu pulled out a kitchen knife. The little skeleton was stunned. "No, little master, what are you doing with a kitchen knife? Are you going to cook for us?" Suyu gently shook his head. "What are you doing then?" "Silencing me." Suyu's eyes were as sharp as the kitchen knife in his hand. He squinted at the little skeleton and played with the kitchen knife in his hand. "Do you still want to know the taste of the world's best place?" The little skeleton's face suddenly stiffened, and he laughed embarrassedly. "Little master, you must be joking. The little skeleton, have seen all kinds of scenes. Why would I be curious about the world's best place?" The little skeleton raised his neck and looked like a gentleman. So you didn't want to argue with him, and he put away the kitchen knife. However, as soon as he put it away, the little skeleton lost his sense of propriety and muttered disappointedly, "I wonder if it's okay. Little master, can you take it?" "Sigh, I really want to know." Suyu's eyelids twitched wildly. Without saying a word, he picked up the kitchen knife and chopped it down. My left egg. The right one fell off too." Right at this moment, a crisp voice came from Suyu's body. When he walked closer, he saw that it was a red jade pendant that was shining brightly. Suyu's soul walked over immediately and stared at the jade pendant with a solemn expression. It finally came. The Heaven-Covering clan had invited Suyu to participate in an operation to capture the 10,000 saints. At first, Suyu was still a little hesitant, but now, Suyu looked at the blue heart puppet and then at his own soul, and the corners of his mouth curled into a smile. Chapter 31:14. At the same time, in the boundless sky, a huge projection was suspended in the sun, moon, and stars. In the projection, a handsome man was standing on a throne, holding the killing sword in his hand. He was kneeling on one knee. "I am incompetent and failed to complete the task." His voice was loud and clear, with a touch of indifference. If Suyu was here, he would recognize that he was none other than Zhang Wushuang, whom he had not seen for a long time. Since Zixuan's death, Suyu and Zhang Wushuang had completely broken up. Zhang Wushuang had failed to betray Suyu and killed Zixuan, but he did not think it was his fault. Instead, he pushed everything to Suyu. "It has nothing to do with you," the huge projection said in a majestic voice. That voice belonged to Prince Xiaoyao. He had personally searched for Suyu and failed, so he could not blame Zhang Wushuang. Zhang Wushuang's task was only to go to the Puppet Saint clan and warn them of the impending disaster, so that they could refine the heart of the blue heart puppet as soon as possible. Once the refinement was successful, it would be time for the Holy Mountain to take back the puppet. Everything was as Suyu had guessed. How could the Puppet Saint clan hide such a dangerous puppet from the Holy Mountain? There is only one reason why the Puppet Saint clan had been able to refine it for so many years. The Holy Mountain was waiting for them to succeed. Years of planning, and in the end, it all benefited Suyu. Prince Xiaoyao was calm. Hearing that, Zhang Wushuang clenched his fists and raised his head. "Suyu?" He snatched the blue heart puppet. The huge projection nodded slightly. Why him again?" Zhang Wushuang was inexplicably angry. Why does he snatch everything? He snatched my emperor killing sword, my divine throne of heaven and earth, and even my most beloved woman. Now, he even wants to snatch the blue heart puppet. Prince Xiaoyao said lightly. Su Yu is the successor appointed by the human ancestor. His vitality is strong, no weaker than yours. Zhang Wushuang clenched his fists, his eyes full of resentment. However, if you gather the Emperor four-piece set, you can surpass him and become an existence on par with the Holy Mountain Saints. Prince Xiaoyao revealed an unbelievable secret. What? Zhang Wushuang was in disbelief. Emperor, is this true? I've already obtained 2 of the 4 pieces of the Emperor's set, but I haven't discovered any great power from them. Zhang Wushuang voiced out his confusion. Back then, when he was still a low-level being, he had started accumulating the Emperor's set of 4 treasures. At that time, the Emperor's 4-piece set might have been a rather good mystery item. But now, it seemed that those things were not worth mentioning. How could he not be surprised when Emperor Xiaoyao suddenly said this? You also know that it's just a set, and it's useless if it's scattered. Only by gathering a complete set will a great opportunity appear. Xiaoyao, son of heaven, said, if you can grasp it, you'll be an existence that's on par with us. Hearing this, Zhang Wushuang's emotions surged. There was no reason for Xiaoyao Emperor to lie to a human cultivator. The Emperor's set of 4 treasures was forged by a human great being from 10 years ago. It contains the secrets of his lifetime's power. Zhang Wushuang was shocked. After being in a 9-star civilization for so long, how could he not understand the past of the human race? Almost every other era, there would be unbelievably powerful existences. They often had extraordinary combat abilities. The most famous ones were the human ancestor from the last era and the ancient human king from 10 years ago. Su Yu was the designated successor of the human ancestor. Then, wasn't Zhang Wushuang the successor of the ancient human king? The human ancestor has been suppressed by our holy mountain. To obtain his legacy, Su Yu has to walk to the end of the heavenly road. As for you, you only need to gather the Emperor's set of 4 treasures. One could imagine how difficult it would be for both sides. If you want to defeat Su Yu, you have to get all the Emperor's set of 4 treasures, Xiaoyao, son of heaven, said. Zhang Wushuang was excited again. He said, I must become the king of the human race first. Xiaoyao, son of heaven, said slowly, your first step is to conquer all the human leaders in the 9-star civilization and become the king of humans. Only then will you be qualified to represent the human race and ascend the heavenly road. At the end of the heavenly road, the last Emperor's set of 4 treasures is located. The heavenly road again. Zhang Wushuang was shocked. Then, will Su Yu ascend the heavenly road too? Although I will stop him, he will. Zhang Wushuang clenched his fists and said firmly, all right, I will wait for him at the heavenly road. Before that, find the 3rd Emperor's set of 4 treasures, the ice crystal crown. Xiaoyao, son of heaven, suddenly said, ice crystal crown? Zhang Wushuang's breathing quickened. The ice crystal crown was the symbol of authority in the Emperor's set of 4 treasures. It contained unbelievable power. But why can't I sense it? Zhang Wushuang was confused. Every piece of the Emperor's set of 4 treasures had a faint connection with him. As long as it appeared nearby, he would sense it before anyone else. Because he is at a place that ordinary people cannot reach. There's a powerful seal there that cuts off your senses, Xiaoyao, son of heaven, said. Zhang Wushuang was surprised. Where is that? Moreover, since you know about it, why don't you retrieve it directly? Although the world was big, was there a place that Xiaoyao, son of heaven, could not reach? Since he already knew about it, couldn't he just retrieve it and hand it over to him? Why did he have to retrieve it personally? The people of the Holy Mountain cannot enter that place. Xiaoyao, son of heaven's tone was complicated. There was both helplessness and fear in it. Zhang Wushuang was secretly shocked. There was such a place in the world? Please tell me. I will look for it now. Zhang Wushuang cupped his fists and said. In the giant projection, a black speck of light flew over and entered the space between Zhang Wushuang's eyebrows. Suddenly, a giant map appeared in Zhang Wushuang's mind. This is... Zhang Wushuang was confused. Xiaoyao, son of heaven, sighed deeply. The ancient tomb of the master of the ultimate ruins, at the same time. The goddess clan. Amidst the sky full of flowers, a peerlessly beautiful dreamlike beauty stood in the midst of the flowers. She bowed and listened to the instructions of the old woman in front of her quietly. Jingyu, that area is about to open. Have you not found a suitable partner yet? The old woman was the clan master of the goddess clan. So you had once pretended to be the clone of Xiao Yao, son of Heaven Mirror Flower, and intimidated her. Now, she was much more well-behaved and did not dare to look for a suitable partner for Xia Jingyu. However, there was a great opportunity that was about to arrive that required Xia Jingyu's presence. Moreover, she had to team up with a strong member of the opposite sex. Xia Jingyu had been unwilling to make her choice for a long time, delaying it until today. No, I just want to train in the clan. Leave the opportunity to someone else. Xia Jingyu was indifferent. If it was in the past, the clan master would have lectured her. But now, she had no choice but to be polite. Fine, we have already arranged for a suitable partner. After you enter the secret realm, you can do whatever you want. There is no need to force yourself to cooperate. Chapter 31:15. Xia Jingyu raised her eyebrows slightly. She didn't want to make such an arrangement on her own. Seeing her expression, the clan master was a little impatient, but she could only explain patiently. Only men and women are allowed to enter together. I won't force you to cooperate after you enter. That's the limit. To be honest, if she hadn't seen the body of Jinghua Tianzi, who clearly ordered the goddess clan not to find a spouse for Xia Jingyu, why would she be so polite to Xia Jingyu? According to her usual style, she would have taught her a lesson long ago. How could she be so picky? Xia Jingyu sighed helplessly. She knew that the clan master was reaching his limit, so she had to agree. Okay, I hope he won't pester me. Time passed by quickly. Half a year later, at the edge of the nine-tailed heavenly emperor's realm, Suyu traveled in an orderly manner. As he hurried along, he controlled the surge of soul power. On this day, he appeared on an isolated island in the middle of a vast ocean. This island was the gathering place for the heaven-covering clan to send messages. The surge of soul power has made the ancestral soul technique several times stronger, Suyu murmured. Although the ancestral soul technique was extraordinary, it hadn't reached an unfathomable level. Especially in front of the Soul Saint clan, it was like child's play. The root of the problem was that Suyu's own soul wasn't strong enough to display the ancestral soul technique. Now that his soul power was close to the 10,000 saints, one could imagine how powerful the ancestral soul technique would be. With a move of his mind, a wisp of soul power surrounded his body, making it hazy and unfathomable. If outsiders wanted to investigate his real body, they would have to penetrate this layer of soul power. In other words, the opponent's cultivation had to reach at least the 10,000 saints level. Hunting the all-saints strongman who came out of the ultimate divine master's grave. Suyu chuckled. That's interesting. He took a step forward and arrived on the isolated island. The moment he landed, he immediately felt several eyes glancing at him. If he wasn't mistaken, they should be the other strong men invited by the heaven-covering clan. Their cultivations were uneven, with the weakest being the late ancient saint and the strongest being the great saint. Suyu calmly came to the top of the mountain and saw several strong men of different races, each occupying a side, ignoring each other. His arrival only caused them to size him up. When they realized that they couldn't see through Suyu's soul energy, they all became vigilant. Suyu's powerful soul was able to capture the communication between many souls. An expert has arrived. What terrifying strength! My great sage soul power is like a clay ox entering the sea. I almost couldn't pull it back. This should be an old monster of the great sage late stage. The sky-covering clan has really paid a huge price for this hunting mission. They even managed to invite such a person. The higher one's cultivation base was, the more they treasured their lives. For such a dangerous mission, the higher one's cultivation was, the harder it was to invite them. Shoo, don't say anything. The other party's cultivation is unfathomable. He might be able to hear what we're saying. A young, pretty woman sent a soul message to end their conversation. Everyone stopped in fear. They didn't dare to use their soul power to converse. The pretty girl's eyes turned, and she walked over with a smile. Her facial features were soft, giving off the feeling of a pretty daughter from a humble family. When she walked over, it was like a spring breeze. "My friend, may I ask if you were invited by the Sky-Covering clan?" When Suyu looked at him, he was surprised to find that he was a rare human expert, just like him. Her cultivation base was quite extraordinary. She had reached the early stage of the Great Sage Realm, similar to the Netherworld Old Ancestor and the Green-Robed Old Ancestor. The difference was that she was very young, about the same age as Suyu. It was rare to see such a young, early-stage Great Sage. In terms of talent, he was comparable to Bai Shui. "Yes," Suyu answered calmly out of politeness. His attitude made the woman feel even more mysterious. She smiled. "I am Lu Xiaoyu, a member of a human alliance at the Six Paths Heavenly Realm." Human alliance? This was the first time Suyu had heard of an organization like the Human Alliance in a 9-star civilization. He had been to the Nine-Tailed Heavenly Realm and the Mirror Flower Heavenly Realm, but there was no such organization. "Oh, human Inu." Suyu casually mentioned the alias he had used before. Lu Xiaoyu was taken aback, her eyes filled with joy. "You are also a human?" She really did not expect to meet a strong person of the same race with such profound soul attainments in a place like the Nine-Tailed Heavenly Realm. Suyu nodded. He wanted to ask about the Human Alliance, so he wanted to chat with her. The two of them found a corner and conversed familiarly. From her, Suyu found out that every realm that had a master had a Human Alliance. Only the masters of the Nine-Tailed Heavenly Emperor Realm and the Mirror Flower Heavenly Emperor Realm had been destroyed by the human ancestor 1 era ago. So far, no human alliance had emerged. "Why is that?" Suyu asked curiously. Lu Xiaoyu explained, "Because if there is no heavenly emperor in charge of a realm, the Taoist energy in the world will be difficult to maintain. It will flow to the other realms, causing the land to be very barren. The human race is weak, so they usually migrate to the other 8 great realms. The number of humans in the Nine-Tailed Heavenly Realm and the Mirror Flower Heavenly Realm is small, so it is even more difficult to form an alliance. So that was why. Speaking of which, he had indeed rarely encountered groups of humans in the 2 realms. The Qing Emperor had once said that Suyu had to defeat all the kings of the human race and become the king of humans. But until now, he had not even encountered a large-scale human organization. It turned out that there were no similar organizations in the 2 realms. Brother Inu, to be able to train to such a high level of cultivation in the bitter cold land of the 2 realms, it is incredible. Lu Xiaoyu took out a jade tablet and said fervently, "If Brother Inu does not mind, you can join the Human Alliance of the 6 Paths Heavenly Realm. With your abilities, you will definitely be put in an important position." Suyu accepted the jade tablet and cupped his fists. "Thank you." Lu Xiaoyu could not help but feel disappointed when she saw that Suyu had accepted it without any response. Every member of the Human Alliance only had the right to invite others to join them once, and they had to apply again after using it. Suyu had accepted it just like that, and there was no response. She was a little disappointed. "I don't have any other gifts, but this is for you." Suyu handed over a piece of blue hard iron. Lu Xiaoyu was stunned and only recognized it after a while. She said in shock, This is blue hard iron?" This item was so precious that it was difficult to find it in the world. It was as difficult as ascending to heaven for an ordinary person to obtain one. Only those ancient crafting families might have an extremely small number of them. Inu, who was standing before her, had given one to her so casually. Noticing this scene, the pupils of the strong martial artists at the side shrank, their eyes filled with passion. Chapter 31:16. "Do you dislike it?" Suyu asked, seeing that she had not moved for a long time. Lu Xiaoyu came back to her senses and shook her head. She said excitedly, No. Senior's gift is too valuable." She hurriedly caught it with both hands, feeling extremely excited. This was a top-grade material. Even a trace of it could increase the self-repairability of a Tao artifact. She had been granted an invitation in exchange for a piece of blue hard iron. It was a huge profit. She was extremely glad that she had recognized the extraordinary nature of the senior and obtained such a treasure from him. Unknowingly, She had changed the way she addressed him as senior instead of brother Inu. It was not that she was trying to curry favor with him, but she did not dare to address him as a peer since he could casually take out a piece of blue hard iron as a gift. Keep it well, Suyu said meaningfully. Lu Xiaoyu glanced at the greedy gazes around her. Her heart tightened, and she quickly put it away. Swish! Not long after, another mysterious strong man landed on the island. He was covered in dazzling moonlight, carrying 9 Dao artifact swords condensed from starlight on his back. Wherever he passed, the swords whistled. In the pavilion, many strong men subconsciously covered the Dao artifacts at their waists because they found that their swords were uncontrollably gathering towards the young man. Even Suyu couldn't help but lightly press on the Absolute Heaven Sword. For a moment, the Absolute Heaven Sword at his waist moved restlessly for a moment. Although it was only for a very short moment, it was enough to surprise Suyu. The Absolute Heaven Sword was a sword of great malice. Apart from the Emperor, no one could make it submit. But it was responding to someone it had never met before. Whoosh! After he landed, the moonlight on his body dissipated, revealing his true form. It was a young man in a brocade robe with a sword-shaped pattern on his chest. Seeing the pattern, Suyu suddenly understood. Mingjian Villa. This person was from the Mingjian Villa. The Mingjian Villa was the family that had forged the Absolute Heaven Sword. No wonder the Absolute Heaven Sword was responding to this person. However, he could only sense it. The Absolute Heaven Sword had killed many of the people of the Mingjian Villa. How could it really submit to them? Only those ordinary swords would be tempted by the people of the Mingjian Villa. Even the Mingjian Villa has been invited. The person in the pavilion was shocked once again. The Heaven Covering clan is determined to win. The young man in embroidered clothes restrained the moonlight on his body, and he raised his head high as he surveyed the surroundings. His expression was unable to conceal the arrogance of being superior. After all, Mingjian Villa was ranked 3rd among the sacred clans, and indeed had the right to look down on most people in the world. However, when his gaze descended onto Lu Xiaoyu, his gaze paused for a moment before a trace of delight surged onto his arrogant face. Little sister you. He strode forward quickly, ignoring Suyu, who was talking to Lu Xiaoyu, and stood between the two of them. Lu Xiaoyu was also surprised. Brother Duyue? The young man in embroidered clothes before him was a rather famous figure in the sword Dao of the younger generation of Mingjian Villa. Not only was his ability to forge Dao sword superb, even his sword technique was unique. Duyu, who was born in the Mirror Flower Heaven Realm, had joined the nearby Six Paths Heaven Realm's human alliance since she was young and had made a name for herself. Among the 6 heavenly sons of the Human Race Alliance, Duyue's strength could definitely be ranked in the top. At least, he was much stronger than Lu Xiaoyu. Rumor had it that his cultivation had reached the later stage of the Great Saint Realm, and he was stronger than many of the old monsters in the pavilion. Little sister you, so you're here too? Duyue said delightedly. He knew that Lu Xiaoyu had a very profound background in the Human Race Alliance that ordinary people could not hope to reach. Having a good relationship with her would be of great benefit to the future. Lu Xiaoyu nodded politely, then walked past him and came to Suyu's side. Senior, let's go over there. He pointed to a quiet place in the distance. Duyue frowned and looked at Suyu. This is... Lu Xiaoyu thought for a moment, then explained helplessly. This is Senior Inu. Senior, this is Duyue from Mingjian Villa, an old acquaintance of mine from the Human Race Alliance. In fact, her relationship with Duyue wasn't that great. Oh, Suyu replied casually. He did not have a good impression of Mingjian Villa, who had plotted against them. Duyue sized Suyu up, a look of suspicion on her face. Senior, Lu Xiaoyu's abilities were at the early stage of the Great Saint Realm, which was quite impressive. Since she addressed him as senior, his abilities should be at least at the middle stage or even the late stage of the Great Saint Realm. Did the person in front of her have such a cultivation? Senior, where are you from? Is Inu your name? It sounds unfamiliar. Duyue's eyes were filled with provocation. Lu Xiaoyu's expression changed. Please watch your attitude. Do not offend Senior. Looking at Lu Xiaoyu, who was so cold to her, Duyue became even more displeased. In the Human Race Alliance, Lu Xiaoye had been on good terms with her. Now, her attitude towards him had changed drastically because of a man. Little sister, you have to keep your eyes open. There are many deceivers in this world. Don't be deceived by them, Duyue reminded her. However, in Lu Xiaoye's ears, she was trying to sow discord between her and Senior Inu. How dare you? Lu Xiaoye said angrily. Senior, do you need to deceive me? Why would a person who could casually give away blue heart iron need to deceive her? Why would he deceive her? You may know a person's face, but not his heart, Duyue insisted. The people of the Sky-Covering clan could invite with the people of the 3 territories near the Mirror Flower Heavenly Prince's realm. However, in his many years of traveling, he had never heard of a great saint like Inu. She didn't know what method this person used to deceive Lu Xiaoye. Clang. Without another word, Lu Xiaoye pulled out her Dao artifact and pointed it at Duyue. Scram! Don't provoke me. Hearing that, Duyue kept his mouth shut, a hint of fear on his face. Now that the Sword Saint clan was in a precarious situation, they could not afford to offend anyone, especially the power behind Lu Xiaoye. Fine. I shall see when he will show his true colors. Duyue snorted coldly. He walked to the side angrily, glaring at Su Yu with a gaze full of dissatisfaction. Su Yu was speechless. He had offended someone for no reason over an insignificant woman. What an undeserved calamity. Even though this person named Duyue was not worth mentioning in his eyes. Su Yu silently closed his eyes, sitting cross-legged on the ground to cultivate. Lu Xiaoye tactfully stood guard at the side. He was about to break through to the ancient saint level and was only a step away. However, he did not know when the opportunity to break through would come. Perhaps in the next moment, or perhaps in a few years' time. He did not like the feeling of not being in control. It seems like everyone is here, haha. A day later, a voice that Su Yu found familiar finally sounded. He opened his eyes and looked over. The old lady from the Sky-Covering clan who had invited him was walking over with a walking stick. She briefly counted the people in the pavilion, and a comfortable smile spread across her aged face. Chapter 31:17. It seemed that all the people she had invited had arrived, and none of them had missed the appointment. Old Demon Immortal, let's cut the crap. Shouldn't you tell us the specifics of the situation now? Said a boorish man whose face was covered in black flames. He had obviously been waiting for a long time, and his patience had run out. Yes, the task of dealing with a 10,000 Saints powerhouse is beyond our capabilities. If you can't give us some assurance, I won't be able to continue participating no matter how good the conditions are, the late-stage Great Saint said without beating around the bush. Su Yu remembered very clearly that the old woman had said that the main force to hunt down the 10,000 Saints powerhouse was someone else. He and the other invitees were only there to support them. But even if they were to support, hunting down a 10,000 Saints powerhouse was an extremely dangerous task. If they were not careful, they would die without a burial place. Haha, don't be impatient. The old demon immortal laughed hoarsely. Her smile was strange. Her old hand took out a ball from her bosom and pinched it. Then, an image was projected into the sky. In the image, a majestic figure was surrounded by the sun, moon, stars, mountains, rivers, grass, and trees. It was as if he was in another world, stumbling as he walked in the void. After a few steps, he spat out a mouthful of blood. The blood he spat out turned into countless civilizations and living beings along the way. Seeing this scene, all the experts present became serious. Those who were reclining or leaning couldn't help but stand up. Pairs of eyes stared at the majestic figure without moving. Even through the image, they could feel the suffocating pressure of the 10,000 Saints powerhouse. However, they could all see that the 10,000 Saints powerhouse was in a very bad state. It seemed like he was seriously injured. The old demon immortal had a deep smile on his face. First, as you can see, the 10,000 Saints powerhouse that we're going to hunt was seriously injured when he barged into the tomb of the ultimate Emperor Lord. Otherwise, the Sky-Covering clan would never dare to target a real 10,000 Saints powerhouse. At this time, the majestic man covered in flames spoke again. Do you have any more confidence? Don't tell me that just a few of US can hunt down an injured 10,000 Saints powerhouse. Even if the 10,000 Saints powerhouse is dead and only his skeleton is left, he can still kill all of us here. As soon as he said that, many people looked at the flaming man. Even Suyu was no exception. It seemed that this flaming man had a deep understanding of the 10,000 Saints experts. Haha, of course there's more. The old woman took out another sphere and crushed it. Another projection appeared. In the projection was an old, broken ship shuttling through the ghost fog. It let out a mighty whimpering sound as it shuttled through the boundless world. At the bow of the ship, there were two figures standing strangely. One was an incomparably stooped and shriveled old man with two ghastly green eyes and a shabby cloak. If one didn't look carefully, one would think that he had crawled out of a coffin. The other one was a righteous young man covered in milky white radiance. He carried a golden long sword on his back, and his body was as straight as an arrow. His awe-inspiring righteousness was out of tune with his surroundings. Patriarch Gaition, the Samsara, human monarch? When the picky flaming man saw this scene, he sucked in a breath of cold air. What? Human king of Samsara? The appearance of the Patriarch Gaition was not beyond their expectations. After all, this was a mission initiated by the Gaition clan to kill the 10,000 Saints experts. How could the Patriarch of the Gaition clan not take action? However, the fact that the Samsara human monarch had been invited had completely overturned their expectations. Lu Xiaoyu, who was beside Suyu, could not help but tremble. She was in awe and worry. Suyu looked at the righteous figure and was slightly surprised. Judging from his appearance, he seemed to be a human. Moreover, he was named after the human king. Xiaoyu, who is he? Suyu asked. Lu Xiaoyu pursed her red lips, her eyes full of worry. He is the king of the human alliance at the reincarnation heavenly realm. People call him the Samsara human monarch. His strength should be similar to the king of the human alliance at the sixth heavenly realm. How strong is he? Suyu asked. Lu Xiaoyu shook her head. I don't know, but he has the legendary experience of fighting against the 10,000 Saints without dying. Some people call him the young 10,000 Saints. Young 10,000 Saints. Suyu was chased by two 10,000 Saints. Not only did he survive, but he also successfully snatched the skeleton of the 10,000 Saints. Oh, Suyu's expression was indifferent. He did not care. However, he had already made up his mind to refuse this operation. Suyu, who had personally fought against the 10,000 Saints, knew very well that even a severely injured and dying 10,000 Saints was not someone the Elder Gaition and the Samsara human monarch could handle. If they were the main attackers, they were destined to be annihilated. However, the old demonic fairy smiled and said, Besides, we have a third trump card. She clapped her hands, and the two images in the air were annihilated at the same time. They then gathered together to form a hideous image of the face of an evil ghost. Seeing this image, everyone present felt extremely disgusted and uncomfortable. This is the ultimate curse of your Gaition ancestor, the curse of oblivion. The great saint late stage, strong man, said in horror. He took several steps back, looking extremely fearful. The rest of the people also looked horrified and pushed away. The old demonic fairy looked around and was satisfied with everyone's fearful gazes. She smiled and put her palms together. The image in the sky dissipated and collapsed. It's just an image. The real curse of oblivion is in the hands of the elder. Hearing this, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. They were all shocked. You brought the curse of oblivion with you? The burly man, who was covered in flames, asked with joy. The old demonic fairy smiled. Of course, the 10,000 Saints are not like other things. We, the Gaition clan, do not want to end up like this. Since we have decided to hunt this 10,000 Saint strong man, of course we have to kill him in one go. The appearance of the curse of oblivion was like a reassuring pill to everyone present. What was the curse of oblivion? It was a terrible curse that the ancestors of the Gaition clan had used to kill a 10,000 Saint strong man. It was known as the number one curse in the world. If they asked for it, the severely injured 10,000 saint strong man would really have nowhere to run. As support, the pressure on them would be greatly reduced. It's not too late for anyone to back out, the old demonic fairy said with a smile. However, no one backed out, including Su Yu. Since the Gaitian clan was confident of winning, why not get a try? He wanted to know what this 10,000 saint strong man had obtained from the grave of the ultimate Emperor Master. Was there a shortcut to enter and exit the ultimate divine steel? It seems that no one has any objections. The old demonic fairy waved her hand. In that case, follow me. When Su Yu was about to leave, he felt someone tugging at his sleeve. When he turned his head around, he saw that it was Lu Xiaoyu. She hesitantly said, "Senior, please guide me. I will be eternally grateful, and I will surely repay you." Huh? Su Yu was slightly surprised. Why do you say that? Why did Lu Xiaoyu seem to be worried about something? Chapter 31:18. Lu Xiaoyu looked around and whispered, "Elder, you may not know this, but there has always been a legend among the humans." Su Yu listened quietly. He didn't know why, but when he heard the word legend, he remembered the Qing Emperor's last words. It is said that the ultimate human king can reach the end of the heavenly road and become the divine ancestor of the human race, comparable to the emperor of the holy mountain. Lu Xiaoyu was worried. Hearing this, Su Yu looked calm, but his heart was in turmoil. This was almost the same as what the Qing Emperor had said. However, the legend omitted the legacy left by the human ancestor at the end of the heavenly road. When did the legend appear? Su Yu's eyes were deep. Lu Xiaoyu thought for a moment. Half a year ago, it suddenly spread throughout the entire nine-star civilization. All of the human alliance knew about this legend. Half a year ago, when he had just escaped from prison, they really want to see the world in chaos. Su Yu's eyes were filled with a cold light. Without a doubt, the legend was spread by the Xiaoyao emperors. Their purpose was to create as much trouble as possible for Su Yu to reach the heavenly road, so that he would die in the internal strife of the human alliance. Elder, I'm a close relative of one of the higher-ups in the 6 paths of human alliance. If I meet the reincarnation human king, I'm afraid I'll be in danger. Lu Xiaoyu voiced her worries. So you thought for a moment. He had a soul that was close to the level of all saints and a strong all saints puppet body forged from the blue hard iron puppet. When necessary, he could still use the puppet, not to mention defeating the reincarnation human king. Protecting himself and Lu Xiaoyu should be no problem. Okay. After thinking about it carefully, Su Yu felt that he was confident, so he agreed. Lu Xiaoyu smiled and heaved a long sigh of relief. Although the elder in front of her was not comparable to the reincarnation human king, he could at least protect her. Let's go. We can't be left alone. Lu Xiaoyu pointed to the people who were rising into the sky. Su Yu nodded and got up to leave. Suddenly, a muffled sound like thunder came from his abdomen. A ball of golden light penetrated his abdomen and penetrated the soul energy on the surface of his body. How could such a strange movement escape the senses of the people present? They all looked over. Is this a sign of breakthrough? Yes, outside the golden light, inside the Gai Zhao mansion. This is a breakthrough to the ancient saint realm. The strong man, covered in black flames, said suspiciously. The rest of the people looked confused. Su Yu used his soul to block off all probing in the surroundings, causing people to feel that he was an old monster with an unfathomable cultivation. Yet, he had only managed to achieve a breakthrough to ancient sage. This was truly astounding. Is there a mistake? The person who casually gave out a piece of blue heart metal hasn't even reached ancient sage yet? Old demon immortal couldn't have invited someone who wasn't even an ancient sage to help, right? They didn't want to believe what was happening in front of them, but the increasingly dazzling golden light that gradually dispersed their soul force dispelled their suspicions. The person before him was indeed not some powerful senior. Instead, he was just an insignificant cultivator who had yet to make a breakthrough to ancient sage. Ha ha ha, I'm dying of laughter. Amidst the shock, a young man's loud laughter resounded throughout the pavilion. Du Yu held his stomach and laughed loudly. He pointed at Su Yu and said, I told you that I had never heard of any Inu. Xiao Yu, not only did you not believe me, you even drew your sword against me because of him. I've said it before, he'll show his roundness sooner or later. Little you, do you see that? This is the senior you want to curry favor with, haha. Do you felt unusually comfortable, unprecedentedly comfortable? Especially when he looked at Lu Xiaoyu, whose face was gradually turning pale. He felt even more carefree. Lu Xiaoyu clenched her fists tightly and looked straight at Suyu. The remaining disbelief in her eyes disappeared completely after the soul energy around Suyu's body was completely dispersed. With her great saint cultivation, she could already tell what it meant when Suyu couldn't suppress his breakthrough. Are you lying to me? Lu Xiaoyu was furious. She felt that she had been deceived. She was a dignified great saint, but she had been fooled like a fool. Not only had she offended the powerful Du Yu, but she had also condescended to curry favor with him. But the cruel reality was that Du Yu was merely a middle-stage heaven law master, whose strength was far below hers. Recalling all her actions, she was so ashamed and resentful that she wanted to find a crack to hide in and never come out again. So you turned a blind eye to the reactions of the outside world. He was extremely excited. After so many years, the opportunity for a breakthrough had finally appeared. I didn't say anything about my cultivation. You were just being presumptuous. So you gave her a brief reply and immediately began setting up the formation in preparation for a breakthrough. Lu Xiaoyu clenched her fists so tightly that her fingers dug into her palms. The adoration, admiration, trust, and joy just now had all turned into hatred. You shameless liar! I hate you. Suyu scowled and said coldly, before I go back on my word, wait quietly by the side. If there's any trouble, I can still fulfill my promise and save you once. Hearing that, Lu Xiaoyu burst into laughter. Her laughter was unusually shrill. She pointed at her own nose and screamed hysterically. Inu, what do you take me for? A fool? A young cultivator who was about to break through to the ancient saint level had the audacity to say that he would save her once in the future. Did he really think she was a fool who could be easily deceived? Lu Xiaoyu felt like she was being deeply insulted. She pointed a trembling finger at Suyu. Lu Xiaoyu, don't need your protection. Leave your so-called protection to others. I was blind to have come to you. Lu Xiaoyu turned around and left resolutely. Her face was full of bitterness, and the gentleness and gentleness she had when they first met were nowhere to be found. Suyu said nothing, but silently crossed off his promise to save her life. If she didn't need it, what was the point of keeping it? What should we do? Wait for him to break through to the ancient saint level. The many strong men looked at each other. The old Maxian looked at Suyu meaningfully and said, leave him to break through on his own. We will go ahead and gather at the ambush point. It'll be best if he can make it in time, but if he can't, it doesn't matter if we lose him. Suyu was personally invited by the old Maxian, and the old Maxian was well aware of his strength. However, there were many strong men here, and Suyu's presence made no difference. That's true. We have a heavy responsibility, and we can't waste it on a little middle-stage master of the heavenly law. Let's go. Don't waste time. The people urged each other and left with the old Maxian. But before they left, many of them looked at Suyu out of the corner of their eyes. Everyone present remembered that Suyu had casually given away a piece of blue hard iron. From the way he had acted, it seemed like he had more than one piece of blue hard iron with him. Greed was the original sin of all living creatures. It was especially so for people or things that one shouldn't be greedy for. Chapter 31:19. After they left, the little skeleton emerged from the dark and looked in the direction where the crowd had left. He said gloatingly, young master, you seem to be in trouble. How could Suyu not know that he had been targeted? And there would be a lot of them. If they want to die, what can I do? Suyu said helplessly. Even though he was in the critical period of his breakthrough, he was not someone who could be targeted by anyone. Among that group of people, apart from the old man in the late stage of the great saint realm and the burly man covered in flames, Suyu was wary of the others. That's true. They'd better be sensible and not come back to cause trouble. Otherwise, they'll be miserable. The little skeleton stood in front of Su Yu and temporarily protected him. Su Yu, on the other hand, seized the opportunity to make a breakthrough. The power of the heavenly law master in his body quickly filled the 800 Taoist marks in his body. The Taoist marks glowed brightly and were extremely dazzling. As far as the eye could see, there were 800 bright scars on Su Yu's chest, which were exceptionally peculiar. In contrast to the dazzling brilliance, the sky had darkened. Layers of dark clouds of unknown origin gathered together and enveloped the entire sky. The little skeleton, who was leisurely walking, was startled. He opened his eyes wide and said, "Are you kidding me? You're only at the first stage of breaking through, from the middle stage of the heavenly law master to the late stage. Why would the heavenly tribulation come?" He looked at the sky dumbfoundedly and then looked at Su Yu. "Young master, did you steal the emperor's wife? Is that why they hate you so much? I've lived for a long time, and I've learned a lot today. I can't believe someone would encounter the heavenly tribulation when breaking through to the ancient saint realm." Su Yu looked up at the sky and then lowered his head expressionlessly. He continued to prepare for the breakthrough as if nothing had happened. "The heavenly tribulation, I'm used to it. For others, the heavenly tribulation meant death, but for Su Yu, it was nothing out of the ordinary. Ever since he started cultivating, he had experienced the heavenly tribulation every time he broke through." Used to it? The little skeleton stared at Su Yu with his eyes wide open. What on earth had he experienced to describe the heavenly tribulation so casually? Rumble. Right at that moment, thunder rumbled in the dark clouds. Flashes of burning lightning flickered in the clouds. Su Yu's breakthrough had officially begun. The most important thing for the master of the Heaven Tao to break through from the intermediate stage to the advanced stage, which was also known as the ancient sage, was to convert the Tao marks in his body into an orb of sage mark. The orb of sage mote was a vessel for storing ancient sage energy. In terms of stored power, it was more than 10 times that of a middle stage lord of the Heaven Tao. Those people dared to look down on Su Yu because the middle stage master of the Heaven Law was 10 times stronger than the ancient saints. Moreover, many of them had already reached the level of great saints. At this moment, 800 Tao marks burst forth with bright radiance. The radiance became more and more dazzling, and finally, it was so glaring that one could not look straight at it. As far as the eye could see, it looked like a giant sphere. Under the effect of the abundant power, the Tao marks were bending and intersecting with each other, turning into a circular state. However, this process was abnormally slow. The little skeleton used his powerful eyesight to see through the light and see the essence. "My dear uncle, 800 Tao marks?" Little skeleton was shocked. An ordinary person would be considered pretty good if they had 100 Tao marks. If they had more than 200 Tao marks, they would be considered a heaven's pride. If they had 300 Tao marks, they would be considered a super heaven's pride. But how much did Su Yu have? 800. A whole 800 Tao marks. "Did you grow up in a jar of Tao marks?" Little skeleton asked incredulously. He could not help but shake his head in amazement. Then he became serious again. "The more Tao marks, the more difficult it is to condense the pearl of the divine mark." The principle of condensing the pearl of the divine mark was to weave all the Tao marks together to form a sphere. The fewer the Tao marks, the easier it would be to successfully weave it. Conversely, it was not the case. So you had 800 Tao marks. How difficult would it be to weave them into a pearl of the divine mark? Just thinking about it was suffocating. If Su Yu did not have enough energy in his body, the Tao marks would not be able to be transformed. Thinking of this, the little skeleton could not help but sweat for Su Yu. My goodness, you really know how to surprise people. 800 Tao marks. Even the Ren ancestor did not have such an exaggerated number back then. You must succeed. If you can't break through this time, it will be a big joke. If he could not break through this time, part of the Tao marks in his body would be transformed into the divine mark, while the rest would remain Tao marks and be stuck in the breakthrough stage. In this way, he would never be able to break through again. His cultivation would be forever stuck in the breakthrough stage. The Qing Emperor had endured for an era, and the successor that the Rin ancestor had high hopes for, if he could not even break through to the ancient saint level, everything would be over. Fortunately, Su Yu's cultivation was steady, and he had accumulated sufficient energy. Therefore, the Tao marks were bending in an orderly manner and condensing into a sphere. There was nothing out of the ordinary, which made the little skeleton feel much better. Time passed slowly. The sphere in his abdomen was finally taking shape. The pearl of the divine mark was about to take shape. However, right at this moment, an accident occurred. The Tao mark stopped changing and gradually became motionless. The little skeleton's heart sank. As expected, it has come. The most difficult part of condensing the pearl of the divine mark was usually at the end. When the energy in the body was exhausted, the pearl of the divine mark would most likely stop condensing. Su Yu had activated 800 Tao marks at the same time, which consumed an unprecedented amount of energy. The fact that he had stopped at this point was already because Su Yu's energy was extraordinarily vigorous. If it had been someone else, they would have been forced to stop shortly after starting. The little skeleton's heart sank. It's over, it's all over. At the same time, a thunderous roar came from the sky. It was the heavenly tribulation that had seized the opportunity to attack. An electric dragon condensed from thousands of lightning bolts swooped down, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. The power of the electric dragon was no less than the ultimate blow of a great saint later stage strongman. The earth in all directions would certainly be reduced to scorched earth by this blow. The little skeleton saw it and was anxious. This was the critical moment of Su Yu's breakthrough, and he couldn't spare any time to help. If he was struck without any defense, he would undoubtedly die. Forget it, give up quickly. It's too late for the breakthrough. The little skeleton reminded him with a sigh. But Su Yu remained motionless. Rumble. The electric dragon arrived in an instant and soon reached the top of Su Yu's head. Now, it was difficult for him to dodge it even if he wanted to. What are you doing? Defend yourself. The little skeleton reminded him anxiously. The heavenly tribulation was not something that outsiders could interfere with. Otherwise, it would produce a heavenly tribulation that was 10 times greater. Su Yu would die even more thoroughly then. But Su Yu did not seem to hear it. He allowed the thunder and lightning to rumble down and envelop him in a sea of thunder and fire. No! The little skeleton let out a cry. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The descendant of the human ancestor, the future hope of the human race, and the future hope of the great beginning realm. Was he going to perish under the heavenly tribulation just like that? Chapter 31:20. What are you shouting for? Be quiet. However, just as the little skeleton was shouting in despair, a powerful voice came from within the destructive thunder and fire. Then, in its blurry vision, a person slowly stood up from within the thunder and fire. It was Su Yu. The pearl of the sage mark had reached its limit. The energy that had been accumulated in his body for so many years could no longer be condensed. However, the energy inside his body was gone, but not outside his body. He looked up at the vast void and laughed. How many years has it been? Haven't you seen it clearly? The ordeal is my opportunity. Had Su Yu not passed the ordeal successfully in the end. Moreover, he had reaped great benefits as a result. The destiny of the world is not in the hands of the holy mountain alone. Su Yu, want to share? He shouted and raised his right hand. His 5 fingers turned into claws that were as sharp as swords as he ruthlessly tore at his own abdomen. With a terrible sound of flesh being torn apart, Su Yu's abdomen was torn open, revealing the situation inside. Wrapped within his internal organs, a pearl that had been condensed halfway was emitting a gradually weakening glow. Use the ordeal to temper the body. Use difficulties to temper the soul. Su Yu yelled. The thunder and fire around him seemed to have found a vent. They gave up attacking his body and soul and turned to attack the seemingly fragile pearl of the sage mark. Boom! A wisp of thunder and fire rushed over, but was instantly absorbed by the pearl of the sage mark. Seeing this, the little skeleton was dumbfounded. Lunatic! What a lunatic. He wants to use the ordeal to condense the pearl of the sage mark. It shuddered. Looking at the tiny Suyu in the thunder and fire, it had extremely complicated emotions. It felt that he was an irrational lunatic, but at the same time, it felt a surge of emotion and admiration. Staring at Suyu, it felt as if it was looking at the Ren-Zu of the past. Throughout the era, the only person who had been so wild and unbridled was Suyu, apart from the Ren-Zu. Even the 7 disciples who followed the Ren-Zu back then did not have such courage. But if the power of the ordeal exceeds the limits of the Pearl of the Sage Mark, it will be destroyed and the person will die. The little skeleton was experienced and knew that things were not looking good. The Pearl of the Sage Mark had been attracted by the ordeal. If it could not absorb the power of the ordeal before the ordeal ended, it would mean death. Ha ha! Come again! Suyu's hair was disheveled, and he was in an extremely sorry state. Only his eyes, which seemed to be able to see through the world, were extremely bright. That was because the bead of Sage Mark had indeed become brighter after absorbing a trace of thunder fire. This showed that this method was definitely feasible. His words seemed to have infuriated the thunder fire. More thunder fire swept over in a frenzy, intending to extinguish the Pearl of Sage Mark in its infancy. However, they were like clay oxen entering the sea. No matter how many there were, they were all absorbed by the Pearl of Sage Mark, leaving nothing behind. On the other hand, the Pearl of the Sage Mark was glowing brighter and brighter. It was even more dazzling than when it was in Suyu's abdomen. The condensation that had stopped actually started again. Hundreds of Dao marks continued to bend and converge into a ball shape. Rumble. Within the boundless dark clouds, heavenly thunder rumbled. It was as if the will of the unseen world was stirred up, and an even more terrifying heavenly tribulation descended. Chila, 8 different colored lightning bolts descended on the ancient land at the same time. They struck the mountains and the earth, burning everything nearby into scorched earth. After landing on the ground, the 8 lightning bolts intersected with each other and condensed into an 8-colored human figure. Suyu was very familiar with that shadow. Because it was him, the heavenly tribulation of a 9-star civilization is indeed extraordinary, Suyu murmured softly. Because of the isolation of the black abyss, the power of the heavenly tribulation of a 9-star civilization was greatly reduced when it came to an 8-star civilization. Normally, there would only be one heavenly tribulation, and there would be no more after that. However, the one in front of him was obviously not the case. Not only did it occur more times, but it also had memories and could condense into an image of Suyu's previous tribulations. Heaven-defying, heaven and earth punishment. The 8-colored Suyu's palm rotated, and a small cauldron appeared. The 8 dragons on the cauldron swirled restlessly, representing the rules. Time set. The 8-colored Suyu shouted softly. Suyu immediately felt the powerful rules of time descend, freezing the time around him. Space collapse. Then, the 8-colored Suyu said again. The space around Suyu began to collapse irreversibly. Huh? Suyu laughed without saying a word. With a light tap of his toes, time and space were all destroyed. Showing off before an expert, Suyu stepped forward with his hands clasped behind his back. Nonchalantly, he said, "I'm playing with what's left. Don't embarrass yourself with it." He had already condensed the so-called 8 great rules into the domain, and the soul domain had reached its peak. Time, life, soul, death. The 8-colored Suyu ignored him. With a flick of his fingers, the 8 great rules appeared one after another and attacked Suyu. Suyu smiled disdainfully and took a step forward. Invisible soul ripples suddenly surged like a tsunami. The 8-colored Suyu sensed it and immediately released a layer of gray, viscous energy. Creak! With a soft sound, Suyu's powerful soul attack was blocked by the viscous energy. Is this the disastrous power? Suyu's eyes darkened. The disastrous power should be a very special power among all things. It was neither the power of martial path nor the power of the domain, but a kind of overriding power used to punish all things in the world. But so what? Suyu took a step forward and displayed the space domain, reducing the distance between them from 100,000 feet to just 10 feet. The eight-colored Su Yu's mind changed, and the viscous energy on the surface of his body immediately erupted, pouncing toward Su Yu. Su Yu snorted coldly. "I'll teach you how to treat me." He raised his hand and grasped. The 8 great domains appeared in his palm at the same time, condensing into a 3-feet-long claw that pressed toward the 8-colored Su Yu fiercely. The viscous energy that pounced toward him rolled back, pressing the 8-colored Su Yu's body until it was illusory. The latter still wanted to resist, and the divine nine-dragon cauldron in his hand smashed toward him. Su Yu did not hesitate. He pulled out the absolute heaven sword and stabbed forward. Creak! Even the divine nine-dragon cauldron was pierced by the sword. The disastrous power immediately flowed out of the 8-colored Su Yu's wound. He immediately retreated, preparing to escape. But how could Su Yu allow him to escape? The claw that had been raised viciously grabbed at the thunder-lightning Su Yu, dispersing the calamity power around him and capturing him. "That's all you've got," Su Yu said disdainfully. Then he opened his mouth and crushed the thunderbolt Su Yu into threads of disastrous thunder, swallowing it in one gulp. The little skeleton was confused and looked at the scene in a daze. Eating disastrous thunder. "Oh, my dear granduncle, what kind of young master did the Qing Emperor find for me?" Throughout the ages, this was the first time he had heard of someone eating disastrous thunder, and the first time he had seen it. However, this great supplement. No, after eating the disastrous thunder, the pearl of the sage mark in Su Yu's abdomen condensed at a faster speed. After a long while, a total of 800 Taoist marks were all bent and converged into a ball. The pearl of the sage mark was condensed. However, the dark clouds in the sky did not disperse. Instead, they became even gloomier. Rumble. Another 8 thunderbolts descended. No, not 8, because the thunderbolts continued, one after another. 8 thunderbolts formed a group, constantly descending on the ground. Rumble. The thunderbolts lasted for a full minute, and heaven and earth were shattered. Hundreds of thunderbolts descended on the tribulation crossing field. Among them, every 8 thunderbolts merged into one, condensing into an 8-colored Su Yu that was exactly the same as the one just now. 2 o'clock in the evening. Chapter 31:21. Oh my God! The little skeleton had goosebumps all over his body. It's all a mess. One eats the heavenly punishment, and the other scatters it like it's nothing. The little skeleton felt that he had seen countless absurd things while following the Qing Emperor. However, following Su Yu still shocked him. The intensity of the heavenly punishment had completely surpassed the heavenly punishment for breaking through to the ancient saint realm. It was a rare heavenly punishment for breaking through to the great saint realm. Only those geniuses of the great saints and evildoers would be able to enjoy such extraordinary treatment. But what was Su Yu's cultivation? The heavens really wanted to toy with Su Yu and prevent him from breaking through. Heaven-defying, heaven and earth punishment. 108-colored Su Yu surrounded Su Yu like the stars surrounding the moon. Pairs of eyes surrounded by thunder and lightning stared at Su Yu disdainfully. Su Yu stood with his hands clasped behind his back, smiling at the sky. It's too late. Holding the absolute heaven sword, he had never felt so relaxed. With a clang, the absolute heaven sword swept out, and a completely materialized sword wave radiated in all directions with him as the center. The stronger the cultivation, the more power the absolute heaven sword could unleash. After breaking through to the ancient saint realm, the power of the Pathmaster in Su Yu's body was more than twice what it used to be. One could imagine the power of the sword. Boom, boom. Along the way, heaven and earth could not withstand the ravages of the sword wave, and everything collapsed, revealing bits and pieces of nothingness. This was a 9-star civilization, and the hardness of the earth was incomparable to that of an 8-star civilization. Even a great saint later stage strong man could not create nothingness. The power of this sword could be said to be an attack from a peak great saint. Boom! The sword wave spread, covering thousands of miles of mountains and rivers, shattering everything within its range into dust. No, even dust would be shaken twice or thrice by the sword wave, and finally reduced to nothingness. The 100 Suyu were no exception. They did not even have time to react before they were shattered into pieces by the sword wave. Suyu opened his mouth and inhaled. A vast force swept over, absorbing the lightning all over the ground. At the same time, countless sticky tribulation powers were also sucked away. Stop, stop, stop. What are you doing? The little skeleton hurriedly called out. Suyu had successfully broken through to the ancient saint realm, and the pearl of the sage mark had been completely condensed. Why would Suyu absorb the disastrous powers and thunder? Wouldn't that be superfluous and destroy the pearl of sage mark that he had just condensed? Suyu ignored her and continued to absorb the disastrous power and thunder fire that filled the sky. As they neared Suyu, they attacked the pearl of the sage mark as if they had been entrusted with a mission, attempting to destroy it. The little skeleton covered its face. It couldn't bear to watch. It really didn't know what was wrong with Suyu's head to make him do such a stupid thing. No matter how strong Suyu's pearl of the sage mark was formed from 800 Taoist marks, it was impossible for it to withstand the attack of 800 disastrous thunders at the same time. However, the little skeleton had obviously underestimated Suyu. The orb of sage mark in his abdomen shot out 800 domains, which gathered into a huge cage, sealing the devastating tribulation, lightning, and tribulation power. Then, the 800 domains began to compress the tribulation power and tribulation, lightning into a ball. From 100,000 feet to 1,000 feet, from 1,000 feet to 100 feet, and from 100 feet to 100 feet. Finally, it shrank from 10 zhang to 1 zhang. The extremely dense tribulation, lightning, and tribulation power were compressed to the extreme and condensed into a nearly liquefied sphere. The little skeleton was stunned. Is this possible? He stared at the sphere and suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. If so many disastrous powers and disastrous thunders were to explode all of a sudden, no one below the level of a 10,000 saint would be able to withstand it. Hey, what are you trying to do? The little skeleton asked. Suyu stared at the sphere that had been compressed into a liquid state, his eyes flashing with a horrified light. I'm trying something. As he spoke, a 9-colored oil lamp appeared on top of Suyu's head, and a humongous, towering shadow slowly appeared behind him. After it appeared, a pair of giant hands that could shake the stars grabbed the sphere and continued to compress it. The sphere immediately emitted a sound of being overwhelmed. The 800 domains that bound the disastrous powers and disastrous thunders also showed signs of instability, as if they were about to shatter. The little skeleton couldn't help but retreat, his eyelids twitching as he stared at what Suyu was doing. Amid his endless worry, the sphere flickered and became smaller and smaller, but it didn't break as he had imagined. When the hands of the giant shadow had compressed it to the limit, the sphere had shrunk to the size of a foot. Suyu still wasn't satisfied. He pressed his palm on the stone heart on his chest, and the powerful chaotic energy flowed out, turning into another palm that grasped the foot-wide sphere. Sizzle! The sphere was overwhelmed, and tiny cracks appeared on it. It was on the verge of exploding. However, under the compression of the 800 domains, the power of the holy mortal body, and the chaotic energy, the power could not self-destruct and could only continue to be compressed. In the end, the liquefied, disastrous powers and disastrous thunders were forcibly compressed into an unprecedented solid state. The foot-wide sphere was finally compressed to the size of an inch. Its size was exactly the same as the pearl of divine mark. Only then did Suyu retract the holy mortal body and the chaotic energy. He looked down at the 2 round pearls of the same size in front of his abdomen. With a swipe of his palm, he kept the 2 round pearls back into his abdomen. Then, with a shift of his mind, he quickly recovered from his injuries with his strong physique. Seeing that he was safe, the little skeleton ran back immediately. My little master is wise and powerful, unparalleled in the world. The little skeleton's longing for you is like the waters of the Milky Way, never ending. Suyu waved his hand and interrupted him. I remember that you are quite good at taking a beating. His eyes sized up the little skeleton calmly. Back in the prison, the terrifying waters of the yellow spring had overflowed, and any strong man who came into contact with it would be corroded into water. The little skeleton was the only one who didn't care and survived the attack of the evil corpse of the old woman guarding the lowest level without any fear. Now that Suyu had broken through to the ancient saint level and had successfully refined the heavens test into a mysterious pearl, it would be a pity if he didn't test his true strength at this moment. With the little skeleton's ability to take a beating, it was the perfect test subject. Hey, what's with that look? The little skeleton couldn't help but cover its anus. Are women not fun, or men aren't attractive enough? Why are you coveting a lion's anus? Poof! The pearl of sage mark that Suyu had just condensed was almost shattered. He had no more worries, and his eyes became unfathomable. Little skeleton, I have a great mission for you. In this world, only you are qualified to take on it. However, the little skeleton was more cunning than a 1,000-year-old fox. It shook its head and said, "Do I have a choice?" Suyu smiled. "Yes, and you have two choices. First, accept the mission and let me beat you up. Second, don't accept the mission and let me beat you up. So which one do you choose?" The little skeleton's face was as stiff as a stone statue. Its mouth twitched. "Little master, can you tell me the difference between the two choices?" Chapter 31:22. Of course, there's no difference. Suyu was exceptionally honest as he stared at the little skeleton. "Tell me, which one do you choose?" The little skeleton rolled his eyes and started running. As he ran, he looked back and grinned. Only a fool would choose. His movement techniques were far superior to Suyu's. Could he catch up with him? In the blink of an eye, the little skeleton had disappeared without a trace. Not even a shadow could be found. Suyu stood where he was, with no intention of chasing after him. The faint smile on his face gradually faded, replaced by a thoughtful look. He looked sideways at a certain stone and said, "I'm the only one left. Why don't you show yourself?" He was looking at a place that did not move. There was no one suspicious at all. Suyu raised his finger. An obscure power pulsed between his fingers. He then flicked his finger. The power pierced through the endless space and reached the stone. With a dull thud, a figure suddenly leaped out from behind the stone. He hurriedly extinguished the obscure power that had accidentally contaminated his body. His expression was grave. This person's body was burning with flickering flames. It was the fiery, brawny man who had repeatedly questioned the Gaetian clan. He raised his eyes and stared at Suyu, a hint of hesitation in them. "You can make your move now," Suyu said calmly. He had sent the little skeleton away so that he could meet this person alone. The fiery, brawny man sized Suyu up, a hint of fear lingering in his eyes. He had only arrived halfway and had just witnessed Suyu devouring the entire heavenly disaster and refining it into his pearl of the sage mark. This scene made him, a great saint late-stage expert, tremble with fear. Since ancient times, no one had dared to devour the heavenly disaster, let alone refine it into their second pearl of the sage mark. Just hearing about it sent shivers down his spine. However, he could be sure that the other party had only broken through to the ancient saint level. His cultivation level was indeed very low. "Hand over all your blue hard iron, and we'll mind our own business from now on," the fiery, brawny man said fiercely after calming himself down. The flames on his body expanded to 3 times their original height with a bang. His aura was exceptionally frightening. "I'll bully you first, and then we'll have a friendly relationship from then on, right?" Suyu chuckled. Where did he get his confidence from? Did he think Suyu was gullible or easy to bully? I'm afraid it's both. "Don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit," the fiery man said coldly. "If I want to kill you, it's as easy as flipping my hand." Suyu stood his ground and said, "Then come and kill me. I will stand here and not move." The flaming, brawny man gritted his teeth. Since he had made up his mind to get the blue heart medal, he had no hesitation. Unfortunately, if he had hesitated a little longer, he might have been able to save his life. "You're seeking death. You're just an ancient saint. No matter how strange you are, how strong can you be?" The fiery, brawny man opened his mouth and shouted. A long fire dragon shot out from his mouth and shot towards Suyu. The power of this flame was quite extraordinary. It was almost on par with the tribulation fire from before. However, Suyu had even eaten the disastrous fire. How could the ordinary fire in front of him hurt him? Playing with fire? Suyu looked at the surging flames and muttered, "In the past, I also cultivated secret techniques related to flames." Now that he thought about it, he felt a little emotional. He raised his finger and pointed at the oncoming flames, an obscure power surging from his fingertip. That power was all tribulation power, and then it turned into a grayish-black flame. It was like a landslide that rushed out crazily. The opponent's ordinary fire could not even put up a fight against the overwhelming, disastrous fire. It was like a flame that had encountered water and was extinguished on the spot. Seeing this, the fiery, brawny man was shocked. He stood up hurriedly, and the flames on his body expanded several times, forming a giant wall of flames that was as tall as 10 people. However, in front of the disastrous fire, the wall of flames melted rapidly as if it were made of snow. The fiery, brawny man's heart thumped wildly. He was shocked. How is this possible? You can already use the disastrous fire? At first, he did not understand why Suyu had refined the disastrous fire into the divine mark pearl. Now, he finally understood that Suyu was using it as a container to store the disastrous power, just like the divine mark pearl. You've already discovered it, but you still dare to come forward. I admire your courage, Suyu said calmly. The fiery, brawny man's eyebrows began to twitch. The shadow of death was like a giant palm that was squeezing him, making it difficult for him to breathe. He knew that if he did not leave now, he might really lose his life here. All flames returned to origin, 8 desolations, and earth cracking. As a strong man of the Flame Saint clan, the fiery, brawny man naturally had his own powerful secret technique. He slammed his palms on the ground fiercely. The earth rumbled and shook violently, and countless cracks appeared. Streaks of flames spurted out from the cracks like pillars, propping up the collapsing world. The disastrous fire that was pressing down was also forcefully pushed up. Seizing the opportunity, the fiery, brawny man turned around and fled without any hesitation. Unfortunately, it was obviously too late for him to escape now. Suyu's 5 fingers formed a claw and grabbed the fiery, brawny man across the air. He could faintly feel a strong heartbeat in his palm. The fiery, brawny man could clearly feel a faintly discernible disastrous power tugging at his heart. He turned around and looked at Suyu with an extremely ugly expression. He shook his head and pleaded, "No, I beg you." Suyu remained silent and clenched his 5 fingers tightly. Inside the fiery, brawny man's body, near the heart, a mass of obscure energy condensed into Suyu's claw. He squeezed it hard and crushed the heart. Disastrous power was everywhere and omnipresent. Space could not withstand the disastrous power. Looking at the fiery, brawny man's body that was slowly falling to the ground, Suyu walked forward and murmured, "There is no medicine for regret in this world. If there was, I would have drunk a long time ago." Even Suyu himself had spent many years regretting his actions. For example, Siener's death and his encounter with Jingyu. With a slight sigh, Suyu found the space storage device and searched it briefly. He ignored everything else. Only a seed that was burning with flames was emitting a warm and holy aura. It was placed in the deepest part of the storage device by the fiery, brawny man. Moreover, it was sealed in the 9 seals, which made it extremely precious. What is this? Suyu observed it curiously. He did not know what the seed could grow, but judging from its aura, the thing that would grow would at least be at the level of a great saint. Can a seed give birth to a powerful creature? Suyu was puzzled. Whoosh, whoosh. At that moment, the little skeleton ran back hurriedly. He shouted furiously from afar, "Who dares to bully my master? If you want to bully him, you'll have to step over my dead body first." It rushed over in one breath, speaking righteously and shouting with awe-inspiring righteousness. People who did not know the truth might think that he was loyal to his master. "Finally, you are willing to come back?" Suyu asked calmly. The little skeleton said calmly, What are you talking about? I, I want to scout for information about the enemy for my master. Chapter 31:23. Suyu rolled his eyes at him and said, "Let's go." As he spoke, he put away the seed of unknown origin in his hand. However, when the little skeleton saw it, it couldn't help but mutter, "The holy infant fire seed, which was extinct in the last era, still exists?" Suyu was startled and asked, "Do you know it?" The little skeleton nodded. "Of course." It pointed at the fire seed and said, "This is a good thing. Although it's not very precious, it's rare. In the current era, there shouldn't be many of them. Even if there are, they're kept by those old monsters and can't be sold. Its function is very simple. It's to brew a new body," the little skeleton said. "As long as you use your own blood to water it day after day, when the seed finally blossoms and bears fruit, it will grow into a perfect body." So you suddenly felt that its function was very weak. This thing might be useful for low-level martial artists, but when we reach a realm where we can create a body out of thin air, it's meaningless. With just a thought, he could create a body. Why would he need to expend mental energy and energy? The little skeleton shook its head and stared at the holy infant fire seed with envy. "If you don't want it, you can get it to me. The body that grows from this seed can inherit everything from the body. Moreover, the body will be very pure, without any impurities." Suyu's heart skipped a beat, and he couldn't help but think. His current body was quite awkward. At the same time, he had a part of Mirrorflower Heaven's body and his own female body. Even if he had the opportunity to get the Yin-Yang Gate and return to his original body, he might not be able to get rid of Mirrorflower Heaven. As long as her heart was in his body, she might take the opportunity to devour him. The returning ruins God tablet in his body could not possibly stay by his side to suppress her forever. If one day it was lost, wouldn't it be a disaster for him? "Let me try." So you tore open the seal. A holy aura 100 times stronger than before gushed out, and Suyu couldn't help but dodge. Not only was the seed holy, but it was also full of unprecedented vitality, like a living creature that could be born at any time. Suyu thought about it, and tried to take out a drop of his blood essence and drip it on the holy infant fire seed. However, while the blood essence was still in the air, tendrils of air currents stretched out from the fire seed and wrapped around the drop of blood. Then, through the tentacles, it absorbed the energy bit by bit. During the absorption process, the impurities in the blood were also removed. After all, Suyu didn't really care about it. What really surprised him was that after the holy body's power and chaotic power were absorbed, they fused together naturally and were stored in the holy infant's flame seed. How could this be? Suyu was in disbelief. Although Suyu could use the holy body power and the chaotic power, it didn't mean that he could fuse the two powers. One was a saint physique, while the other was a primal chaos. They should have repelled each other. However, after being absorbed by the holy nascent fire seed, those energies actually fused together, forming a new and unprecedented power. Incredible! Suyu exclaimed in admiration. He couldn't help but sigh at the wonders of the Creator. Natural things could actually fuse two completely opposite forces. After that, Suyu observed it carefully and was even more surprised to find that the various domain forces in its body were also being integrated continuously. It was as if all paths were becoming one. If it was watered every day, the body that was born at the last moment would be an invincible holy body that no one had ever seen before or since. The moment this body was born, it had the cultivation of a great saint. Not only that, but it also had the domain of returning to one, which had never been seen before. It also had the holy body and chaotic power, a brand new power after the fusion of the two strongest forces of the world. It wasn't hard to imagine that the hardness of Mirrorflower Heaven's body would be transferred to the new body. What did you do? Suddenly, Suyu felt a piercing pain in his mind. Suyu covered his head and recognized the voice of Mirrorflower Heaven. He couldn't help but be shocked. Wasn't Mirrorflower Heaven suppressed by the divine tablet of the returning ruins? How could it still be consciously transmitted to his mind? He tried to pick up the divine tablet of the returning ruins. Sure enough, the suppressed Mirrorflower Heaven spoke again. However, in contrast to Mirrorflower Heaven's calmness. She seemed to be a little flustered and afraid at the moment. She shouted anxiously, "Are you fighting with a powerful enemy?" Suyu's heart skipped a beat, and he pretended to say yes. "Damn it, you better protect your heart for me. Don't let it suffer any more damage." Mirrorflower Heaven roared. "Huh?" Suyu returned the divine tablet of the returning ruins and suppressed it again. At the same time, he immediately checked his heart. When he saw it, he couldn't help but be shocked. His stone heart was missing a small piece. At the same time, Suyu felt an inexplicable sense of weakness, as if he had lost a lot of things. Hey, you have to be careful," the little skeleton reminded him. "When the holy infant fire seed absorbs your blood essence, it is also absorbing everything in your body, including all kinds of magical secret techniques, and even your cultivation." "What?" Suyu immediately took out the Son of Heaven's oil lamp, and saw that the lamp had dimmed a little. No wonder the stone heart was missing a piece. It turned out that the holy infant fire seed was indiscriminately absorbing everything in Suyu, including these two things. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" Suyu wanted to slap the little skeleton. The latter looked aggrieved. "You didn't ask. You." Suyu was both angry and helpless. Looking at the holy infant fire seed, which had obviously grown larger, he asked, "How long will it take to give birth to a new body?" The little skeleton counted with its claws and said, "Let me see. About an era." Bang! Suyu really slapped it with his palm, and the little skeleton was thrown off its feet. An era? What kind of joke was this? How could he wait that long? Moreover, he could imagine that the more blood essence he was given, the weaker he would become. But now, in his situation, the more powerful the enemies he would encounter, the more dangerous the environment he would be in. If I stop giving it blood essence, what will happen to it? So he was a little reluctant. The little skeleton rubbed its head. It really did not feel any pain. Of course it will die. It's fine if you don't touch it. It can survive for 2 eras as a seed, but once it is watered with blood essence, it must be watered every other day. Otherwise, it will rapidly wither and die. The little skeleton looked regretful. "I'm afraid there are only a few of these seeds, and there won't be any more in the future." Suyu's expression kept changing. Rapidly wither? He could predict that in the future, if the seed was successfully nurtured, it would give birth to a very frightening body. That might be the only way for Suyu to get rid of Heaven's mirror flower. It would be a pity to give up just like that. But he would continue to be weak. What should he do then? After thinking about it, there was only one way. Keep getting stronger. Get stronger every day. As long as the daily gains were greater than the losses, he would not fall into a state of weakness. Of course, the only downside was that Suyu's strength would grow slower than ordinary people. Unless Suyu was far more hardworking than ordinary people. Chapter 31:24. For new body, I'll go all out. Suyu gritted his teeth and made his choice. He put away the holy infant fire seed and examined the body of the fiery man again. Strange, if the holy infant fire seed is so precious, how did it end up in his hands? The little skeleton also understood and looked puzzled. Yes, the holy infant fire seed is something that all the 10,000 saints dream of. But how did it end up in this little shrimp's body? That's not right. The more he understood, the more he realized how terrifying the holy infant fire seed was. This thing should not have appeared in the hands of a great saint. How'd he get it? There's something strange about this. So he was deep in thought. With a flick of his finger, he burned the fiery man's body and looked in the direction where the crowd had left. Forget it. How he got has nothing to do with us. The most important thing now is to hunt down that seriously injured 10,000 saints, Suyu murmured. He really wanted to know what kind of shocking item the heavily injured myriad saint expert had brought out from the sinkhole Emperor Lord's tomb. But he wanted to know how to get in and out of the tomb. Swoosh! Suyu rode on the little skeleton and chased after them. 1 month later, in front of the ruins, Suyu finally caught up with a large group that had left earlier. Look, that brat is back, a great saint expert exclaimed. Oh, has he broken through to the ancient saint level? Another person mocked. Really, since he has already fallen, why did he come back to die? Does he have a death wish? The crowd whispered to each other, feeling conflicted about Su Yu's return. Those who were thinking of Su Yu's blue heart, iron, naturally heaved a sigh of relief. Those who did not were shaking their heads. Welcome back. The old demon fairy leaned on his walking stick and looked back at Su Yu with a benevolent smile. His smile faded as he looked down at the 10,000 miles of scorched earth. Su Yu glanced around and found that most of the people present had grave expressions as they stared at the scene on the ground. Su Yu followed their gazes and looked down. His expression changed slightly. The ground within 10,000 miles seemed to have been ravaged by something. It was scorched black and lifeless. The most terrifying thing was that one of them had 5 dark abysses. What kind of person could create such a shocking scene? Only the 10,000 Saints experts, right? Su Yu, who had witnessed the fight between the strong men of the 10,000 Saints with his own eyes, had the right to comment on this. He didn't know how much strength this myriad Saint expert had used. At that moment, the little skeleton suddenly bit Su Yu's sleeve with its mouth. What's wrong? Su Yu turned his head and asked. The little skeleton pointed at the sky mysteriously, indicating for Su Yu to fly up. Su Yu was puzzled. He followed the little skeleton to a higher altitude and asked, "What's the matter?" Little skeleton's expression was grave and fearful as he pointed downwards. Look again. Su Yu lowered his head to take a look, and what he saw caused his pupils to shrink. Now that he was higher up in the sky, he could see the situation on the ground more comprehensively. However, Su Yu could not help but be shaken by what he saw. The 5,000 kilometers of scorched earth was not the result of a battle. It was clearly a 10,000-kilometer wide footprint. The 5 black abysses that stood almost side by side were actually created by the giant's toes pressing on the ground. It was only 1 foot, but it created a scene as if the strong men of the 10,000 Saints had fought. What the hell was this? Who was the one who stepped on it? If it was the strong man of the 10,000 Saints who escaped from the tomb of the master of the ultimate ruins, then his strength was too terrifying, far beyond the expectations of the Gai Tian clan. Even with the help of the Reincarnation King and the Gai Tian Old Ancestor, it was impossible to defeat such a strong man of the 10,000 Saints level. Su Yu was shaken, and his mind was lost in thought. He wondered if he should continue moving forward with them. At that moment, Mo Laotian noticed Su Yu's abnormality and asked, "Your Excellency, did you find anything?" Su Yu hurriedly hid his abnormality, shook his head, and flew down. No. Standing high up in the sky, he could only see a part of the scorched earth on the ground. He could not see it clearly at all. It was actually just a footprint. Oh. Mo Laotian did not suspect anything. Looking at the scorched earth on the ground, his expression was solemn. I believe this is where they fought. We're not far from them. For the rest of the journey, everyone should be prepared to take precautions. His words made everyone tense up. Some of the temporary groups that had agreed to advance and retreat together were discussing among themselves. Lu Xiaoyu could not help but approach Du Yu. She tugged at his sleeves gently and said pitifully, "Brother Du Yu, you must protect me." Du Yu laughed and put his arm around Lu Xiaoyu's shoulder. "Don't worry, I am here. Even if the strong men of the 10,000 Saints come, they will not be able to hurt you." As he spoke, he squinted at Su Yu. Indeed, Lu Xiaoyu had returned to Du Yu's side, and she had cursed Su Yu to get his forgiveness. Yes, Brother Du Yu is the best. Lu Xiaoyu's face was flushed, and she leaned against Du Yu like a little bird. Su Yu glanced at them casually, and followed at the back of the group expressionlessly. He was thinking as he walked. Wei Wei, young master, you are thinking of a dirty trick again." As soon as the little skeleton finished speaking, Su Yu glared at it, and it immediately corrected itself. Cough, cough. What I mean is young master is far-sighted and astute. Su Yu looked away, but his heart was heavy. Such a huge footprint could not have been made by a seriously injured and dying strong man of the 10,000 Saints. Be prepared at all times. If the situation is not good, we will retreat immediately, Su Yu said through telepathy. The little skeleton had seen huge footprints before, so it naturally knew the stakes involved. It nodded seriously. Yes. The group followed Old Demon Immortal, and through the signal left behind by old ancestor guy Tion and the Reincarnation King, they hurried toward their destination. Finally, a month later, they arrived at a land of endless ruins. There was dust everywhere, and the land had been completely destroyed. The atmosphere radiated with energy waves that could destroy heaven and earth. Even a strong man of the great saint level would be killed instantly if he was not careful. Standing outside the battlefield, everyone's heart was tense, and even their breathing was stagnant. For most of them, this was the first time they had seen a fight between strong men of the 10,000 Saints. Moreover, this was not a real fight between strong men of the 10,000 Saints. It was a battlefield left behind by a seriously injured strong man of the 10,000 Saints and two strong men of half a step to the 10,000 Saints. Gulp! Looking at such a shocking scene, many people swallowed hard. They could not help but wonder if they were qualified to participate in this hunt. Not to mention the dying strong man of the 10,000 Saints. Even the scattered energy on the ground could easily kill them. Everyone, it's just ahead. Get ready to attack. Old Demon Immortal bellowed, and his expression was extremely grave. She took out a doctrine artifact to protect herself and carefully walked toward the battlefield. There will be another update at 9 p.m.